Paranormal M takes you beyond the veil of the ordinary. Ghosts, legends, and mysteries, they wait in the dark. Subscribe now, because the unknown is closer than you think. The Boy Beneath the Floorboards. I was around 11. That's when everything started, about half a year after my mom passed from a sudden aneurysm. Looking back, I think that's when something opened inside me. Something that let me feel things most people couldn't. That night in 1988, a chilly November evening, my mom was in terrible pain. My cousin, who was more like my big sister, helped me get her into a taxi headed to Jefferson Hospital. I remember helping her settle in and her hand trembling in mine. Then out of nowhere, a voice, clear, loud, and right next to my ear said, "Kiss your mom. Kiss her now. This might be the last time." And I froze. I was just a kid, and I didn't even know what that kind of voice meant. But something in me listened, and I leaned in and kissed her forehead again and again, whispering, "It's okay, I love you." And 2 days later, she was gone. After that, I bounced between relatives and the church members until I ended up staying with an older woman everybody called Miss Edna. She was a quiet church lady who lived in Norristown, Pennsylvania. Her house was an old two-story with creaky floors and a strange stillness even in summer. And from the first night I felt it, like my eyes were on me. Not human eyes, but something else. Miss Edna herself was kind of eerie, but pale-skinned, dark circles under her eyes and long silver hair that made her look like she'd stepped out of an old photograph. One evening after dinner, I noticed a framed portrait of her printed in a porcelain plate. The image somehow looked alive, and I couldn't explain it. I covered it with a napkin. She caught me and laughed, asking why. I just shrugged. How could I say that to her face on that... Well, rather, how could I say that her face on that plate scared me? That night she told me to lock her dog in the basement before bed, and I did as she said and climbed to the bed beside her. I did it just like I used to do with my mom. Before we slept, she pointed to a small machine on her nightstand and said, "If this thing starts beeping, it means my heart stopped, and call 911, you hear?" And I lay awake for hours, and I was afraid to breathe, and eventually I heard snoring. It was deep and strange. I shook her arm, whispering, "Miss Edna," and she laughed softly. "It's just me," she said. "He sneaks out sometimes." But the basement door, the one I had locked, was wide open. It kept happening for 3 nights. The lock would be undone by morning, and Buddy would be there wagging his tail like nothing happened. One hot afternoon, Miss Edna went to shower, leaving me alone in the kitchen. I opened the fridge for some watermelon, and when I turned around, I saw him. A boy, maybe 9, faded and see-through, wearing old suspenders and a plaid shirt. He was smiling, but it wasn't the kind of smile that comforts you. It's the kind that freezes you. We just stared, and neither of us moved at all. It was like time stopped. And then suddenly he was gone. I dropped the watermelon, ran to the bathroom door, and begged her to let me in. She told me I couldn't. The Lord don't like folks barging in on women bathing. When she finally came out, she asked if I wanted to join a church trip to Baltimore, and I said yeah before she even finished her sentence. Never went back to that house. Never saw Miss Edna again. But that boy and his outline and his smile never left my mind. That was the first ghost I ever saw, and it was just the beginning. And I don't think women like folks barging out of them bathing either. although I'm sure the Lord also doesn't. The faucet. In April of 2014, one of my oldest friends and my housemate, he ended his life in our apartment. I'm going to call him Nate. Nate had been carrying a kind of sadness for years, and he'd mentioned more than once that he didn't trust himself to stay alive. But back then, in early 20s, I never really thought he could really mean it. Strangely, he'd been lighter that last month and joking again, showing up to game nights and even talking about road trips. So when I left for a long weekend with my girlfriend, I didn't think twice. We were staying at my mom's place when the call came. Nate and I had grown up a few blocks apart, and so I'd known his parents half my life. After the shock and blur of those first days, they asked me if I could just pack up some of his things, the stuff that mattered most to him. So a few nights later, my girlfriend and I drove back to the apartment. It was quiet in that awful way where even your own footsteps sound wrong. Another friend of Nate's, a coworker, had found him after he didn't show up for his shift. Police had already finished their work and cleaned everything. That smell still filled the air. Not blood, not bleach, something heavier and chemical and final. Walked into the bathroom where it had happened, and it was like the air itself turned solid. My throat closed up. I turned on the faucet, shower handle, just to make some sound, any sound. The water felt like something alive again. When I stepped out, I told my girlfriend I just didn't want it to be completely silent. And she nodded. The silence in that place was unbearable. We sat in Nate's room across from the bathroom, and she perched on the bed, and I sat at his desk staring at his half-full coffee mug. A stack of old postcards he'd been collecting. We talked a little, quietly, nothing important, just trying to make it feel less impossible. Then she stopped mid-sentence and said, "Wait, do you hear the water?" The apartment was dead still, and the shower had stopped. I walked to the door and pressed my ear to it, and there was nothing. I opened it slowly, and the faucet was turned off, not dripping, it was off. I turned it again, and it worked fine. I twisted it on, then off a few times, and it was as if I was testing whether reality still made sense. It did, and yet it didn't. We looked at each other wide-eyed and pale, and both started just saying his name. "Nate, was that you? Are you here?" And then came this presence. Not cold, not scary, just immense. Like the air was suddenly aware of itself. We both felt it at the exact same moment. We said his name again, told him we missed him, and told him it was okay. After a few seconds, it was gone, and the room felt hollow again. Later, we made each other swear that we hadn't imagined it, and that we'd always believe it really happened. We even laughed nervously and asked Nate to flash the lights if he could hear us, which of course made us both panic a little and grab our stuff to leave. Told a handful of people, even Nate's mom. She didn't say much. I don't think she could. Sometimes I turn on that shower and hear that first rush of water. I half expect it to stop on its own. Whispers from the old porch. Ever since I was little, I've always felt something around me. Not in a scary way, just a quiet awareness that I wasn't completely alone. My parents used to tell me stories about things I did as a kid. Apparently, things that would give them chills, and I'm going to share a few here. When I was about 5, we visited my grandmother's old house in Kansas. My grandpa had passed years before, long before I was born. I remember sitting in his rocking chair by the front window. My mom said one moment I was babbling about cartoons, and the next I went completely silent. Then I looked up at her and said, "Don't forget the pipe, June." Her face went pale as a ghost, and Grandpa used to call her June, which is her middle name. And not only that, but he always smoked a pipe. Well, I couldn't have possibly known that. We left soon after that, and Mom never sat in that chair again. When I was 16, we lived for a short while in the woods outside of Flagstaff. It's in Arizona. The house is old and creaky and too far from the neighbors. And one night while I was on my computer in the basement, I heard somebody sprinting down the stairs, and I turned expecting my brother. I saw only a flicker of brown hair disappear into the laundry room, and I called out and there's no answer. Later, when I went upstairs, my mom said everything had gone to My mom said that everybody had gone to town hours earlier. A few days later, our heater malfunctioned and filled the basement with smoke, and the repair guy said the wiring looked like it had been melted from the inside out. Dad had the place blessed the next morning. Years later, when I first started dating my wife, I'd stay over at her family's farmhouse, one that had been in their family for over a century. One night, I dreamt of waking to see an older man at the foot of the bed. He was dressed in suspenders and white shirt, and he looked angry. It's as if I'd trespassed. I woke up drenched in sweat, and my smartwatch said my heart rate had hit 145. The next day, I described him to my wife's mom, and she quietly pulled out a sepia photo of her grandfather, the man who had built the house. He didn't like strangers sleeping here, she said. The House by the Maple Field. To start off, I should probably tell you the house used to be an old farmhouse. It sits near a maple grove with open fields stretching out in front and a quiet patch of forest behind it. It's peaceful out here, just a 15-minute drive to town. We've only got one neighbor close enough to wave at, and it's pretty private overall. The house had originally come to us through an auction at a county. The story goes that it once belonged to an elderly man who'd lived there his whole life. He'd inherited the land from his parents, and after he passed away, no one claimed the property for years. People said he died quietly in his sleep, right there in his bedroom. Some locals even whispered that his brother had taken his own life in the barn decades before, though nobody knows if that part's actually true. And I've done plenty of reservations, or rather, renovations since moving in. The bones of the place are ancient, and judging by the style of the beams and the stone foundation, I'd say it dates back to the early 1900s, maybe even earlier. When we bought the house, one of the previous owners laughed and told me, "Just don't mind the ghosts." I brushed it off and didn't really seem like the haunted type of a house. And that changed one night when our dog Bella started whining at the kitchen wall. No barking, but whining. She stared at a dark corner like she was seeing something I couldn't, and I called her over and she came running. Her tail was tucked behind her and she was trembling. I told myself it was probably a mouse in the wall. Still, it was odd. A week later, I just stepped out of the shower when I heard the bathroom door handle jiggle. That loose metal clink that only happens when someone presses down on it, and I said, "Okay, 1 second." I opened the door, expecting one of my kids, but the hallway was empty and everyone was outside. I told myself there had to be a logical reason. There's always a logical reason, right? There's one particular room upstairs, the one with the old cedar bed frame, had a strange reputation. Everyone who's even slept there at one point or another has felt the mattress dip in slightly. It's as if somebody had just sat down on the edge, and each of my kids experienced it at different times growing up. None of them mentioned it until years later, and turns out they all had the same story. My husband had heard his name whispered in the dark, clear as day, and more than once. He also caught the sound of footsteps pacing downstairs when the house should have been empty. Once I was chatting with him in the kitchen when my cell phone started ringing. The caller ID said home phone. Except we were both right there, staring at the house phone on the counter. Neither of us had touched it. And then there's the voice, and I've heard my daughter call Mom when she wasn't even home. My husband's heard it too, and it's uncanny the way it sounds exactly like her. One night around 10:30, I heard a heavy crash from the upstairs hallway. It was loud enough to make me jump, and my husband was at work. I grabbed the biggest knife in the drawer and froze halfway up the stairs, debating whether I really wanted to check. And I ended up calling my son, who was at a bonfire about half an hour away. He came right over with a couple of friends, all of them acting like they were clearing a SWAT zone, complete with flashlights. They searched the entire house and even the crawl space, and there's nothing, not a single thing out of place. I still hear creaks now and then and footsteps maybe 10 feet away when I know I'm alone. But honestly, it doesn't feel threatening. The house has a life of its own. Old and a little mischievous, but not unkind. The Visitor at Willow Creek. Alright, so a little background first. I, a 25-year-old female, I've dealt with weird paranormal stuff basically my entire life now. And trust me, I wish I hadn't. I've tried everything, ignoring it, saging my rooms, telling it to go away like some bossy toddler. Even convincing myself I'd maybe just sleep deprived and maybe I was imagining things. But somehow, spirits always find a way to say hi. Most of the time it's been fine, but when I was little I actually saw them like full figures. As I got older, it turned into more of a feeling. Sometimes random objects moving or lights flickering when they shouldn't be. Never anything truly bad, except twice. The first big one was during college. My roommate and I rented this tiny off-campus house from the 1940s. Real fixer-upper feelings. A few weeks in, we found out the landlord's father had accidentally just died in that house. And at first it was little stuff, like our kitchen clock would stop every night at 2:11 a.m. The front door would unlock itself. And sometimes I'd hear faint humming from the living room, and I told myself it was the air vents or creaky floors or whatever. That someone's watching feeling just wouldn't go away. My roommate was very religious. Not Catholic like the girl in my old story, but Pentecostal. And she was terrified. Her aunt came to pray over the place, left bottles of anointing oil in every corner. And that's when things got worse. One night I woke up in the middle of a sleep paralysis, and I could move my eyes, but I just couldn't move anything else. In the doorway there was a tall, warped shadow. I told myself not to look directly at it. Naturally, my dumb brain looked anyway, and it leaned forward, and its limbs were too long, like somebody stretching in a fast motion. Then it rushed at me. I somehow forced myself out of bed and ran to my roommate's room, shaking so bad I could barely breathe. And after that, things went quiet. We broke our lease and left before the semester ended. So we're gonna fast forward to now. I live in my great-grandparents' farmhouse. It's on our family's property, 80 acres of forest and creek land. It's been here since the late 1800s, and it's peaceful. It's remote and, probably haunted. I moved in last September with my sister, fully expecting something paranormal to happen. But for 6 months there is nothing but silence and bliss. Then she moved out last month, and about a week later, and weird things started again. Last Monday, my dog, who's a big shepherd mix, jolts me around 1 a.m., growling at the window. Not as usual someone's outside bark, but this deep, trembling growl. I figured maybe it's raccoons, but That happened again the next night. Same time, same window. Thursday and Friday, nothing. Saturday morning, I let him out around 10. My cousin, who lives down the gravel road, was fishing at the creek with a friend. I talked to him for a bit, went back inside, took a long bath. Around 3 p.m., I heard a knock on the door. Not a knock, it was kind of a slam, the kind you hear in cop shows. My dog went nuts. I rushed out of the tub, grabbed a towel, opened the door, and there was nobody. My cousin was still down by the water, and there were no tracks on the porch either. And it had rained the night before, so I would have seen footprints. Told myself it was thunder, and I moved on. That night around 10, I'm on FaceTime with my boyfriend, and I'm watching a show. That's when the same violent knock happens again. The dog's barking, and I freeze, and my boyfriend's telling me to check the door. I peek through the blinds, and there's nothing. The motion sensor lights on the porch, they're not on. Makes no sense, because they always turn on. I sit back down, and I'm panicking. A few minutes later, there's this scraping sound like someone dragging a stick slow and deliberately across the porch boards. My boyfriend swears he can't hear it, but he can see me and the dog both turn our heads at the same time. My heart was racing so hard I thought I might pass out. So I looked again. No one there, still no lights. I tried to be logical, and maybe it was the wind and maybe an animal. But the boards shifting from temperature changes, maybe. I've lived here long enough to know the difference. Nothing about that knock felt natural. It was personal. And the scariest thought, of course, is that it wasn't a ghost at all, that it was a real person. But out here, no one even knows how to find this place. My GPS doesn't work past the old bridge, and only my family and a few friends and my boyfriend know the address. I called my cousin to come over that night. He brought a flashlight, checked the porch and the woods, and nothing. I tested the lights and they worked perfectly. When I asked if he'd come by earlier that day, he looked genuinely lost. So yeah, either something human is playing a very committed prank, or something else finally realized my sister moved out and decided it was just me now. The sound beneath my bed. Oh, I'm still terrified of sleeping in the dark. Even now at 26, I leave a dim lamp on through the night. People say it's childish, but they weren't there when it happened. When I was little, something strange happened to me. Something that still makes my chest tighten whenever I think about it. I used to be skeptical about paranormal stories for the most part. I thought people exaggerated or misremembered things. But after that winter, I stopped laughing. My mother raised me, my older brother, and my younger sister on her own. We grew up in a small apartment near the river. My great-grandparents lived just a few blocks away when they were alive, and my great-grandfather used to fix clocks. My great-grandmother always had cinnamon candies in her purse. He passed away when I was 6, and she followed 2 years later. I don't remember much from their funerals, just my mother crying softly beside the kitchen window that night. And a few weeks after my great-grandmother died, we were watching Tintin, our family's Christmas time ritual. My mom started talking about how much she missed them. It was one of those quiet, nostalgic evenings, but later that night, just as we were falling asleep, there was this deafening crash, like someone had slammed a door right next to my ear and the entire apartment shook. My mother ran into her room, panicked, but everything seemed fine. Nothing had fallen, nothing was broken. The next morning, weird things started. At first, it was harmless stuff. Radio turned on by itself, hallway light flickered even after being replaced. We'd hear faint knocks coming from the kitchen walls, like soft tapping from inside. Mom kept saying it was the pipes or the wind, and we tried to believe her, and then it got worse. I started waking up in the middle of the night and I'd be frozen. I couldn't move, I couldn't scream. And from under my bed came this slow, rhythmic thump, like something pressing against the floorboards again and again. Sometimes it moved closer toward my headboard, and I'd lie there in absolute terror with tears running down my face. I'd be praying it would stop. After a few nights of this, I told my mother I couldn't sleep there anymore. She let me share a bed with my sister, but even then I'd hear faint scratching sounds from the next room. It'd be as if whatever it was knew I had moved. My mom eventually took us to church. She didn't know what else to do. The priest gave her 3 small wooden crosses and told her to hang them above her beds. I remember holding mine so tightly that I left marks on my palms. A few days later, my mom gathered us and said we should tell it, whatever it was, that we were safe and it could leave now. We said it out loud, all 3 of us. It felt silly, but it did work. The noises stopped and the light stopped flickering, but I never really forgot. Now every time I lie in bed and the house creaks, I feel my throat tighten. I still wonder, was it just sleep paralysis, imagination, or did something follow us home from that quiet December night? Whatever it was, it made sure I would never sleep comfortably in the dark again. The Woman in the Blue Apron. Growing up in the late 1970s, my parents hired a housekeeper named Clara. Again. It wasn't unusual back then, because every morning women from the city took the early bus to the suburbs wearing crisp blue aprons and carrying small lunch bags. Clara had been with our family since before I was born, and she'd even worked for my grandparents. I still remember seeing my grandfather waiting for her by the maple tree near the bus stops I rode to school. Clara was more than help, she was family. She came twice a week to our home and twice a week to my grandparents' house. I always felt strangely jealous of the Friday family, the one she worked for on her 5th day. Felt like she belonged with us, and my name is Claire, and my parents had planned to call me Clara. But when our Clara joined us, it would have been confusing, so I became Claire. Claire was gentle and soft-spoken, or Clara. She left peppermints under her pillows and pressed flowers inside of her books, and when she found coins in the laundry, she polished them, arranged them neatly in our dressers. At Christmas, she brought us hand-knit mittens, and she always remembered her birthdays. One summer, my mother took us to see where Clara lived, a small brick building near the river. It was pretty tall, though. Her apartment was tidy and full of light, and what caught me off guard were the photographs. Our old-school portraits all framed and hanging proudly on her wall. We were her family, too. When I was 14, my parents separated, and my mother cried for weeks. Clara comforted her, quietly folding laundry while my mother poured out her heart. Clara told us her own husband had left years ago. She understood. She held her family together when we were falling apart. Then one hot afternoon in 1981, my sister ran upstairs to tell my mother that Clara was asleep in the chair. My mother's face just went off. There was no 911 back then, so I called the operator and the ambulance came. But Clara never woke up. It was a stroke, they said. She died that day. They wouldn't let us see her in the hospital because we weren't quote-unquote family, but she was our family. She had died in our home, same place she had cared for all of us all those years. After Clara passed, strange things began to happen. When I babysat my little sister, I'd hear soft footsteps upstairs. The dog would be fast asleep and my sister snoring. And sometimes, late at night, I'd hear the faint humming. And, by the way, Claire used to hum while she worked, so my mother didn't believe me. Years later, after I'd grown up and divorced, I moved back into that same house with my mother. And one night, my boyfriend and I were sitting by the fire when he went upstairs. I came down, white as a sheet, and, "Claire," he whispered, "who's the woman in the blue apron? She just walked past you." I froze, and Claire had always worn a blue apron after all. And at her funeral years before, her niece had told me how much Claire adored, quote-unquote, her girls. I let her believe I was named Clara, and it made her smile. Maybe that was my small way of saying thank you. Because some people don't leave when they die. They just keep looking after you, in the only way they know how. The house that wouldn't let go. In my late teens and early 20s, I was proud of atheist. Well, I was a proud atheist, I'm sure. Ghosts, fairy tales for people who can't handle the dark. So I moved out of my family home. That was 10 years ago. And in all that time, I've lived in 7 different cities. You know what's funny is nothing strange ever happened anywhere else. No weird noises, no flickering lights, no unexplainable small things. Things like open cupboard doors or the TV turning itself on. Just that one house. The house where the phone used to call my grandma's mobile by itself. The landline would ring her, even though no one was in the kitchen to dial it. And no, we didn't even know what spoofing was back then. And there were voices, like lights that would blink for no reason and objects that would move on their own. Once I saw something, maybe you could call it someone, standing in the hallway just watching. I could fill a book with what happened, but 2 stories stand out. Incident 1, the flying nasal spray. It was around 7 p.m. and Grandpa had gone to bed early. My siblings and I were on the lounge. Grandma was cooking dinner. Mom was tearing the place apart looking for her nasal spray, and she was already irritated when I decided to help. She stood at the start of the hallway, me by the doorway at the first bedroom. The rest of the corridor was empty. Then Mom yelled, half out of frustration and half jokingly, "If someone knows where it is, just give it to me already." And from the far end of the hallway, something flew through the air. The nasal spray hit her in the chest before bouncing to the floor. I just stared, because what the hell was that? She looked at me wide-eyed and said, "You saw that, right?" No one else was there. I swear I saw it fly straight toward her. Incident 2, the mattress that came back. And this one happened 12 years later. Nan and Mom were out, and we had a friend sleep over for the night before. So the spare mattress was standing upright in the hallway. Grandpa asked my sister to take it downstairs to his room. I watched her do it, and she carried it down, and I even closed the stair gate behind her, and, well, we all chatted in the kitchen for a while. That was before Grandpa went back downstairs, and the rest of us wandered off. But when I turned toward the hallway again, the mattress was there, standing upright exactly where it had been before. I froze, and my sister came up behind me, pale. "I took it down," she whispered. Grandpa didn't want to talk about it. We didn't either. None of us stayed alone for the rest of that day. And for weeks afterwards, I couldn't shake it off, because every time I thought about that mattress, my stomach turned cold. The humming in the walls. Almost every night, I hear the same tired old tune. A faint classical melody that drifts through the air like it's coming from another time. It's so soft that sometimes I think it's all in my head. And other nights I swear I can hear kids laughing and thumping around inside my closet. There's no shared wall with any neighbor, which makes it even stranger. Sometimes I'll feel a low vibration in the walls. Not quite from them, but more like beside them. Like I'll be sitting at my kitchen table and there it is again. That distant buzzing. I've checked every appliance and every light and every outlet. Nothing in my house could make that sound. At first, I told myself it had to be the neighbors. But then it started following me. I'll be at work, sitting by the window on my break, and I'll hear that same faint hum, and it sounds exactly like my phone vibrating. I always check when my screen's dark, and it happens too many times for me to brush off. And sometimes I wonder if I'm losing it or if my late aunt's trying to say something. And then there's the bell. It rings in my kitchen. Same number of chimes, same rhythm in every time. I press my ear against every inch of the wall trying to find the source, and there's nothing. And the worst part is lately I've been waking up in the middle of the night with my eyes open and there's a dark figure standing there. It doesn't move, it just is. And last night I reached out trembling and my hand passed through empty air. Even typing this gives me chills. I don't know if I'm piecing together random noises and coincidences or something's really here with me. The thing with my eyes. When I was younger, my father lived across from a small forgotten churchyard. I used to think it was the most fascinating thing in the world since I'd always been obsessed with ghosts and mysteries. Between our house and the graveyard was an open stretch of wild grass, tall enough to brush our legs when we crossed it, swaying like whispers whenever the wind blew. And somehow that made the place even more unsettling. The first day we moved in, I was annoyed that my sister and I had to sleep in the basement alone. The stairs leading down were painted and faded red, and there was 12 of them. And even though my dad laughed when I pointed out the number, something about them made my stomach twist. They creaked differently, as if they were alive. And the first strange thing that happened was at night. My sister and I are lying on our mattresses on the floor, staring toward the dark hallway. We heard a woman's soft voice calling from the other side, gentle and almost kind, asking us to come see something. I wanted to listen, I really wanted to, but something about her tone made me hold my sister tighter instead. Maybe that upset her, because after that night we began hearing footsteps on the stairs, slow and dragging, and sometimes like hands and feet crawling together. We told ourselves it was just the house settling, but the whispers that followed didn't sound like wood. Then came the night that changed everything. The air felt charged, like static. The shadows moved differently and heavier. We heard something rush down the stairs, and my sister whimpered, pressing against me. I pulled her close, both of us trembling, watching the doorway, and then it appeared. A pale face leaned against the hallway into the room above the doorframe. My sister screamed, but I couldn't move. The face wasn't right, it was smiling, but the eyes were too empty. It pulled back fast as if it realized it had been caught. I dragged my sister into the tiny bathroom and locked the door. We didn't sleep the rest of the night. For years, I lied about what I saw. I told people it was a woman with black hair and a ghostly white face. And that wasn't the truth. The truth was worse. It had my hair and had my eyes. It looked exactly like me, only thinner and paler and tired. I always loved my long brown hair before that night. And the next morning, I cut it to my chin. Years later, I asked my sister if she remembered that house. She frowned and said she didn't remember anything strange at all. Maybe her mind buried it. Maybe she was lucky. I still see that face sometimes, and it still looks like mine. The house by the marsh. It was my senior year of college, and I had completely dropped the ball in renewing my lease. By the time I started looking for a new place, the options were slim to none. Fortunately, a couple of coworkers from the cafe where I worked offered me their upstairs guest loft for $350 a month. Compared to the $950 I'd been paying before, it sounded like winning the lottery. I told myself I'd just be a temporary stop, and maybe 4 months tops, till I could move back closer to downtown Savannah with some friends. The house was in White Marsh Island, about a 20-minute drive from the city. It was an old tan brick place with creaky wooden stairs. It was surrounded by cypress trees and overlooking a stretch of marshland that glimmered silver at dusk. The air smelled faintly of salt and rot, depending on the tide. My new roommates, Mark and Jesse, were both in their 30s, older than me, but laid back. We got along fine, but one Friday night, the three of us were playing cards when we heard someone pounding on the front door, and it was hard. It was like they were desperate to get in. We all assumed it was Jesse's brother, who often dropped by unannounced. But when I went to open it, there was nothing there, just the wind stirring through the hanging moss. Porch light buzzed faintly, and I remember standing there a second too long, trying to make sense of it. When I came back, they asked who it was, and they said no one. Kind of laughed it off. A few weeks later, after a brutal weekend shift, Mark bought a bottle of wild turkey. We decided to have a liquid recovery day. 3 of us sat around the same kitchen table drinking and talking trash about customers. The air was warm and hazy. And then, out of nowhere, Jessie stopped mid-sentence and pointed. We all turned our heads just in time to see a spoon slide slowly but deliberately across the countertop. It didn't fall, it just glided a few inches and stopped. Nobody spoke for maybe 5 seconds. Then we burst out laughing. Kind of laughter that's half panic, like, "Dude, that spoon moved," Jessie muttered. I walked over and touched the counter, and it was dry and flat. No trick of moisture or slope, nothing logical. So we decided to keep drinking. By late October, my parents came to visit from North Georgia. They brought our old dog, a scrappy cattle dog had more energy than sort of a sense of anything. But after dinner downtown, they realized their hotel didn't allow pets. So I told them Rusty could crash with me for the night. Spent the evening happily exploring every corner of the house. And around midnight, went up to the loft, and my bed faced 2 tall windows that looked out toward the marsh. Glowing faintly in the moonlight, somewhere in the night, I just saw them. I woke up to a sound I didn't recognize, a deep growl, and it was low and tense. Rusty was standing rigid at the foot of the bed with his teeth bared, hackles up. His eyes were locked on the space above me, and I couldn't see anything. My skin went cold, and I reached out and grabbed his collar. I was whispering to calm down before the growl faded, and eventually we both drifted back to sleep, albeit a bit uneasy. A few weeks later, I went home for Thanksgiving. Our farmhouse in Elijah always felt like a reset, quiet and safe. And one afternoon, I laid down for a nap, and I was exhausted. When I woke, I couldn't move. My whole body was locked, and I could see the old dresser mirror from the corner of my eye. And in its reflection, standing just behind me, was a woman. Pale, soaked, and hair like black seaweed. And her mouth hung open slightly, but she didn't make a sound. I felt the weight of her presence heavy as the air before a storm. And then as suddenly as it came, it broke, and I could move again, and I sat up gasping. The room was empty. December came. It was my last month at the house. And one cold night, we're taking turns playing chess, talking about random stuff, and death came up. How it sneaks up on people, and that's when Jess asked Mark if he'd ever, Jess asked Mark if he'd ever heard anything about the previous owners, and Mark did hesitate. He said the neighbor had told him a story, and the house had belonged to an elderly couple. The husband had late-stage dementia. The wife cared for him alone. One day the man wandered out confused, and that's when a neighbor brought him back and they found a wife upstairs. Okay. I remember my stomach twisting as I listened. I thought about the spoon and the knocking and the way Rusty had growled at nothing. Maybe it was all coincidence and maybe stress or imagination. Brain's little tricks, but sometimes I think about that house by the marsh. I'm not so sure. The Devil's Tramping Ground. I have a friend who's really into the paranormal like myself. Let's call him Jake. It was October of 2018. We just wanted to go ghost hunting or explore supposedly haunted buildings and areas. We had been researching and decided our drive limit was 4 hours. Came across a place called the Devil's Tramping Ground. At this place, there's a circle in the woods that can't grow grass, and the trees make a circle around it. As legend has it, the devil himself uses that circle of sand and dirt as a portal. He comes to Earth at night and stomps on the ground, pacing back and forth. We read that if you tried to sleep there, on the circle, you'll hear a soothing female singing, and it'll put you to sleep, and then you'll wake up in a different location. So, what did we do? We brought tents, sleeping bags, chairs, and beers, of course. Okay, back to the story. Me and Jake were planning our trip, and another one of my buddies caught wind of it. Let's call him Nick. We were all set to go on Friday when we get out of work. We left the base at around 4 p.m., but didn't actually hit the road until roughly 8 p.m. because we kept getting sidetracked at different stores. I'll skip right to the next part. We get off the highway. It's close to midnight. We have our GPS on, and it was us going down the only damn road with no streetlights. And of course, we start driving down that narrow, dark road slowly, so we can find a clearing for the Devil's Tramping Ground. We read that there would be satanic symbols in front of the clearing, written onto the road. We had our eyes peeled, and there was something odd about this road, and I shit you not. We were being chased the entire way by about 10 dogs and one black dog. Every dog's barking except for that black dog, and he kept appearing in the woods to the left of us and in front of us as if we're driving and he's just trying to turn us around. We found the symbols and knew it was it. The dogs hadn't followed us that far. We parked, got out, we had flashlights. We scoped out the area, and I'm not gonna lie, it was extremely unsettling. We made our way up to the circle and thought, perfect, let's go get our shit. Fast forward about an hour, and it's quiet. We have our tent set up in the circle. We have our chairs set up surrounding our cooler, just telling ghost stories and drinking. Nothing really seemed to bother us other than the occasional twig snapping that sounded like footsteps and the feeling of being watched. We just chalked it up to animals. It's 2 a.m. now. I start to hear voices all around me. And I'm not the only one. Nick and Jake heard it too, and it felt like we were about to be jumped by a group of men surrounding us. But we knew whatever it was wasn't human. The voices stopped, and I shit you not, at the same time the car light turned on. We went to the car to find all the doors open. Unnerved, we slowly closed all the doors and went back to drinking. 2:30 a.m., we're all on edge. Not even drunk at this point because of the events that just took place. Everyone was silent. I could hear and feel my heart beating out of my chest, and you'll never believe it. We all heard beautiful humming coming from every direction. Wish I could describe how it sounded, but we knew that it was not good. We all leaned in as the singing was going on, and without one word spoken, we all got up and went to the car to get out of there. We then visited Lydia's bridge because it was nearby, and it said that Lydia walks the road and the bridge at night. We didn't see anything, so we slept in a nearby Walmart parking lot in the car. Went back the next morning for our things. An unusual encounter. I have always believed in the paranormal. I grew up hearing and seeing things in my house. I'm from Northford, Connecticut, so you can imagine the entire state is pretty haunted. I've heard everything from the house settling to glass breaking, and to my shock, no glass would be shattered on the floor. Anyways, I was 12 when this happened. That makes it back in 2010. My mom and dad split up, so I would go visit my mom on the weekends and be with my dad during the week. My mom found a nice house in East Haven, Connecticut, set up on a hill with a road leading up the hill. On top was a farm with horses. My mom loves horses, so she jumped on the offer. I was a little shit when I was 12, so I had gotten expelled from school. I was living with my mom and my older brother full time. I'd stay up until the crack of dawn every night and sleep all day. I'd always hear things like creaking steps and doors opening and closing, the usual things. One day my mom has her boyfriend over. He was standing in the kitchen when he felt a tug at his shirt. He turned around and nothing was there. Left shortly after. This one night I'm about to tell you about has me shook to this day, and it still remains a mystery. I'll give you a visual of the third floor of the house. That's where my room was. When you open the front door to my old house, directly to your left is a staircase. You walk up the staircase, and on the second floor, kitchen and living room areas directly on your left. And as you keep walking up, there's a hallway that cuts to the right. At the end of the hallway is a bathroom and a dead end. My room is on the right as you're walking down the hallway, right next to the bathroom. One night my mom, brother, and 2 cousins and aunt went out for dinner. I just wanted to stay home and play Call of Duty. My dog Sydney was in the room keeping me company. She was a small Yorkie. And as I was playing, I suddenly had to go use the bathroom, so waited until my game was over, and when I was back in the lobby, I got up and ran to the bathroom. And my dog followed me. I finished, flushed the toilet, washed my hands. As soon, and I mean as soon as I cut the water off, and I was just there and I was drying my hands, I heard creaking up the stairs. It sounded like somebody was walking up the stairs, and I froze, not knowing who it was or what to do, and I was home alone. Sat there for another second. Footsteps up the stairs stopped. A few seconds went by, which felt like forever, and then just like that, I heard a footstep reach the top step. The hallway. I didn't hesitate. Picked up my dog, ran to my room, and locked the door. Sat back down in my chair in front of my TV and just listened. More footsteps, but this time coming down the hallway toward my room. Heard the footsteps creak all the way until I got to my door, and then it slowly stopped. I was frozen with fear, and a few more seconds go by, and then knock, knock, knock. I immediately called my mom to see if she was home yet, and of course, she said no. And after the 3 knocks, I didn't hear anything. No more footsteps, no more nothing. Waited until I finally heard the front door open, and I just burst out of my room relieved. Told my mom what had happened for her to tell me countless other stories of experiences that she had in the house. The time I lived in my aunt's haunted home. A little background on my aunt. My aunt is more than just a sensitive. She can see, hear, feel spirits or entities and even talk to them. These beings can be human or otherwise. They can be dark or positive, it doesn't matter. just like she never focused or strengthened her abilities, she never wanted these abilities. It was inherited through her family line. But different from me, my aunt is extremely powerful without even trying. During the time I was living there, we became very close. She told me a lot of things about my own abilities that I never would have known if I hadn't lived with her. I want to say it was around maybe the second month of me living with her. That's when strange things started to happen to me. I had a little more experience then, and I noticed that if I paid attention to it, it would only become more noticeable. So the little things that would happen, I would ignore and I would pretend it wasn't there. The room where I was staying didn't have an actual door. It had a simple entryway which led straight into the kitchen area. And I also had a view of the other rooms in the house from this entryway. My room was all the way in the back of the home. Now, my aunt had 4 children. 3 smaller children, 1 child who's in high school, and there was one night that I was about to finally fall asleep after coming home from work, and I heard little footsteps in the kitchen. My first thought was that 2 of the smaller children were up and sneaking a snack. I stayed quiet and I listened, and I heard the little footsteps now running back and forth from the main hallway to the kitchen. Continued on for about maybe 2 minutes. At this point, I got up to confront them about being up so late, and walked into the kitchen area. There was no one in the kitchen, and as I walked more into the kitchen, I could hear and feel on the ground the footsteps going away from me, then toward the hallway. And suddenly, everything went quiet. Mustered up some courage and went back to check on all the kids. I walked into each of their rooms. They were all in a deep sleep, and I didn't understand what was going on. Didn't want to overthink the situation, freak myself out either. Went back into my room, and due to everything I've experienced thus far, I fell asleep with my headphones in my ears. The sounds of the little footsteps continued for the next few weeks after this. And in that time, I knew there was something inside my aunt's home. And so far, it had not been too serious, and had never personally bothered me or the kids, so I didn't talk to anyone about it. But then, one night I stayed up watching TV in my room, and once again I heard the little footsteps. I ignored it, and I continued to watch TV. But then I heard the little footsteps run up to my entryway and then stop. I froze, muted my TV, and waited to see if I heard anything else. I was lying flat on my stomach in my bed, and I had my feet and hands hanging off from the sides. The next thing I knew, my bracelet on my arm started to move very slightly up and down my forearm. I freaked out, and I took it off and threw it across the room. After that, my ankle bracelet on my leg did the same thing. I freaked out and jumped up on my bed and told it to please stop. Up until then, nothing inside that home had ever personally touched me. Heard the little footsteps run back through the kitchen, and this time I heard giggling. I could definitely feel whatever this was, and that it was playing with me, much like my little cousins would. Really unnerved me. But still then, I decided not to say anything. After the experience, I had the feeling with hearing some sort of ghost children in my aunt's home. I decided to have my uncle install an actual door to my room, and every night I started sleeping with the door to my room closed. I didn't have another encounter with what I thought was ghost children. My aunt's home was always very lively and very busy. With 4 kids, 3 dogs, it was never quiet inside the house. There was one day that I was actually left home alone for a change. Came home from work and I decided I was going to take a shower. Don't really know why, but I needed to go into one of the kids' rooms to get something. Left the lights turned off and I walked in. I looked to my left toward one of the boys' beds. I saw a transparent figure of a man sitting on his bed. Couldn't see his entire body, but the upper torso, and I could vividly see all the features of his face. He had sunken dark eyes and long black straight hair. He had no expression, but his eyes were full of sadness. And as soon as I saw him, I did a double take, turned on the lights, and the figure was gone. For some reason, I wasn't really scared of this apparition, and I honestly doubted myself about what it was I was seeing. The room was dark. I only saw him for a few seconds, but all the vividness of his features made me wonder if I really did see something. A few days after seeing the ghost of the man, the house was again filled with people. It was the middle of the day, and everybody was off in different parts of the house. I had volunteered to take the dogs out in the backyard to play, and walked into the kitchen and felt like something was off. The dogs didn't react to how I was feeling, so I tried to ignore it. Thought to myself I was being silly. In the middle of the day, after all, I walked over to the door that leads into the back porch. And as I reached for the handle of the doorknob, it turned by itself, and the door opened. I backed up and watched the door fully open and then out of nowhere completely close again by itself. My heart was racing fast. My aunt's boxer dog was standing in front of me with his attention on the door. He was tensed up, growling, and ready to pounce at whatever was in front of me. I waited to see what would happen, and all of a sudden there was a loud boom sound on the side of the porch door. It was so loud, everybody just ran over to see what happened, and I couldn't explain any of it. This was my last straw. I decided to tell my aunt that night everything I had experienced in her house. With all the experiences I've had so far while living with my aunt and her family in her home, I decided to sit down with her and let her know everything that happened to me. I'd tell her about the ghost children, the apparition of the man that I saw, and the door that opened and closed by itself during the middle of the day. My aunt then began to explain to me my family's connection to being able to feel, hear, and talk with the other side. Apparently, it was mostly just the women on our side of the family. There were a few men, including one of her young boys, that had this ability. She explained to me that I was a little bit different. That's because not only my father's side had this ability, but also women in my mother's side as well. She told me I was strong with my ability, but since I was afraid and wouldn't open myself to it, I couldn't do the things that she or her mother could do. And that was because I was so afraid that, there's all these different entities and they're attracted to my energy. Unfortunately, it would be something that I could not turn off on my own without practice and meditation. Then she revealed to me something that, until this day, I'm not really sure if I believe yet. She told me that I was extremely highly protected by quote-unquote something. She couldn't really clearly see what was protecting me, but she couldn't tell if it was an ancestral spirit or just my guardian angel. But she told me if I ever were to have a psychic or fortune teller, if the person truly had these abilities, the entity protecting me would not allow for them to read me. Apparently told her that because she's my family, didn't have to protect me from her, so I was completely shocked by this. I have an extremely high respect for the other side, whether it's ghosts or otherwise. I don't try to provoke or draw these beings to me, and I've never pursued finding out what it is that's actually protecting me. I have accepted that, unfortunately. I do have this connection, and well, maybe one day I'll not be so afraid to open myself to what I can really do. After everything my aunt shared with me, I was a little bit unnerved about everything. Everything I knew that was now inside her house. She told me the ghost children were connected to the land, but they were no threat to us. They were here mostly because of the energy of her own children being in the house. And she did also tell me that she couldn't see or feel the apparition of the man that I saw. She knew something was inside of their son's room, but it was always hiding from her. She told me the door that opened by itself was something that was like somewhere outside of her home. It was living out there, and it was trying to find a way to come inside. Whatever this thing was tried to use my fear to find a way inside of her home. and this particular entity was something very negative. That day it merely hit the wall on the outside of the door because my protector would not allow it to enter, no matter how scared I was. The last thing that happened to me at this house was one night I'm watching TV after everyone was asleep. Started to hear and feel somebody tapping on the window that was above my bed. I had the curtain closed, and for some reason I was a little afraid to look outside. Then the tapping noise started to move, and it tapped my window, moved up and down the wall of my room and up to the ceiling. My heart started to race at this point. Then it stopped at the ceiling, and I actually started to hear footsteps on the ceiling. I was freaking out now. Backed up toward my door, and I was ready to go and get my aunt. Then I heard something fall and hit the ground outside of my window. I'm not too sure what I heard after that, but I think it was something like growling. At the same exact moment, my aunt's boxer dog was outside my front door, scratching at my door and barking. Went over and let him in, and he ran and jumped up on my bed and started barking at whatever was outside. Everyone woke up, and my aunt was able to calm down her dog. She knew the thing was out there. She said that it was going to seal my window and sage my room to cleanse. This thing was very attracted to my energy, and it was very angry that I was too protected to get to me. That's probably one of the scariest experiences I had in that house. Literally, about a week later, I got super lucky and finally found my own place to live and moved out. My aunt ended up giving me her boxer. That's because she said the dog and my protector were now attached, and I had even more protection. All of these events happened about 5 years or more ago now, and I've accepted my abilities for what they are. I don't allow for these beings to infest my life or my loved ones, but keep myself always surrounded by positive energy, and thankfully, I'm living a peaceful enough life. Message from the boy in the blue striped shirt. I noticed a few weird things happen in my place. Tried my hardest to ignore it. I practiced meditating and keeping myself calm and balanced. That way I can control the fear I had. There were a few constant things that continued happening that I could not explain. First thing was my wallet. I always put my wallet inside my purse hanging from the doorknob of my closet door. There were numerous times I'd find my wallet in really random places. I'd wake up and find it on the floor at the foot of my bed. I'd find it laying on the windowsill inside my bedroom. My wallet at the time was a zipper wallet with a loop for your wrist attached to it. It was one time I found it hanging from the hook of where I hung my towel in the bathroom. Super weird. There was even one time my roommate left it hanging from the room doorknob. Told her I didn't know where it was, and she said she found the wallet on top of the washing machine in the laundry room. It became pretty obvious that something was trying to get my attention. Then I started seeing really weird shadows from the corners of my eyes. Started right after my roommate's boyfriend had moved in with us. They would be strange, fast-moving, blurry shadows. As soon as I would try to look at whatever was moving, it would just dash out of my viewpoint. Really didn't get it. One night, I stayed up in the living room after my roommates had gone to sleep, and I saw a very dark, slow-moving shadow going across the doorway to the kitchen, going through the wall that leads to outside of the apartment. I was really scared because this thing was completely black and solid. Even though I didn't feel anything negative about it, I was not sure really what to do. I actually got up and opened the front door just to see if I could see where it went, and saw nothing. I ended up asking my roommate if she saw anything, and she told me that she had never seen anything like that before. Didn't want to frighten her, so I didn't mention anything else about her. About maybe 2 weeks or so after that experience, I started to see the boy in the blue striped shirt. He wasn't really a small child, he was more of a teenager. I want to say maybe 15 or 16. The first time I saw him, he was sitting on the stairs behind the stairway that led to my apartment. Saw him through the cracks on the steps on the other side of the stairway. Never seen him before, and since he had his back to me, I didn't really say anything to him and continued walking to my apartment. As I reached my apartment, I had a view into the sort of back forested area of the apartment complex, and I saw this kid running into the forested area. I froze because there's no way he could run that fast from the second floor stairs to the bottom and run across the parking lot into the forest. Didn't even hear any footsteps or anything, and I knew immediately then that there was something else. After this, I would see him on and off near the apartment building, or sometimes near my actual apartment door. He'd never look at me or recognize that I was staring at him, but it happened so much I got used to it. I was able to keep myself being afraid and ignored him. One night I got home from work pretty late. Went to sleep rather quickly after taking a shower. Around maybe 1 a.m., my dog started barking into my room. I got up angry because I just didn't want him to wake up anyone else. As I just sit up in my bed, just getting ready to yell at my dog, this kid is standing by the door to my room, staring off into space. Didn't notice I was staring at him. And at this point, I'm completely frozen. My dog stops barking and is just tensed up next to my bed with his attention completely on this kid. Then out of nowhere, this apparition slowly moves himself in my direction and starts to walk toward my bed. He stops halfway and then he started speaking. At first he sounded muffled, but then I clearly heard him saying to me, it's demons, don't be fooled, everything is because of demons." The way he said it was so strange, like he had to tell me, and it was pretty quick. Right after I heard this, he completely disappeared and my light switch flicked up and my lights turned on. Heard the light switch flick back up, but I was completely frozen solid in my bed. Afterwards, my dog calmed down like nothing happened. Jumped up out of my bed to sleep with me. Didn't dare get up and turn my lights back off. Such an ominous message. Sort of thought maybe he was trying to give me a warning about the apartment. Never saw the kid ever again after this. The moving voices. I've been told from my family that a few of us are sensitive, whether it be paranormal or otherwise. Never really truly opened myself or sought after any of this quote-unquote sensitive natures, but apparently most of my experiences have been because of this connection. I don't have any pictures or evidence, just my own first-hand experiences. My first experience that I remember vividly and have perfect memory of is when my family moved away from my childhood home when I was around 13. We had been living in the new house for about a month or so and started having some strange things happen to me. It seemed that I was the only one who noticed things even happening. During this time, my parents were fighting quite often. I grew accustomed to hearing them arguing in their room, but then one night, I heard them arguing and I stepped into the hallway to use the restroom. And as soon as I stepped outside of my room, the arguing stopped. Both of my parents were asleep. Everyone was asleep in the house. I'm not sure what I heard. I was young and confused and thought maybe my mind was playing tricks on me. But the next night, it was the same thing. I would hear mumbling far away and voices arguing. Just to step into the hallway and hear nothing but silence. Then one night it got even stranger. Stayed up very late, almost into the morning, and for some reason I just couldn't get to sleep. turned off my TV just to try to shut my eyes. Everything was very quiet, and then suddenly started to hear the voices again, far away, arguing. The voices started to become louder somehow. Then they started to move. Tried as hard as I could to understand what the voices were saying, but I couldn't distinguish any words. Then I heard them by my front door, then in front of my closet, then at the foot of my bed. I was so scared I jumped out of bed and turned on all my lights. I stood there waiting to see if I could hear the voices again, but it didn't happen again. After that night, I slept with my TV or my radio on, or I would sleep with headphones in my ears so I wouldn't hear the voices. A few months later, we moved out of that house and I never heard the voices again. This was something that did affect me at a young age and never forgot the experience. It was one of my first experiences that I considered to be paranormal. The shadow figure at the park. This experience I actually shared with an old friend of mine who was staying with me for a week. This didn't happen to me, which actually made it a little bit less scary for me. And since usually stuff would happen only when I was alone, my friend, who I'm going to call L for privacy, had come over during his vacation time from work, decided to stay with me. He was living in a different state at the time, and he would visit his family during the day and then come back to the apartment at night to sleep. Towards the middle of that week, I finally had a day off from work the next day. We had agreed to hang out that night. He picked me up at my job after work, and this was almost 10 p.m. Picked up some takeout and drove to the small park in my apartment complex to eat. We walked over to one of the 2 picnic tables that were at this park, and we were there for maybe an hour just eating our food, reminiscing about old times and just joking around and having a good time. Suddenly, I felt some really heavy energy in that atmosphere. It was a familiar but still creepy as hell feeling. Kind of froze up and got really quiet and had the urge to get up and look around. I ignored what I was feeling and stayed sitting at the table. L was now giving me a funny look. He asked me if I was okay, and I told him yes. I was starting to get a bit used to this stuff just randomly happening. I didn't want to make a big deal about it to my friend. I then felt like someone was staring at me from a distance. I got chills up and down my arms. Apparently, my friend had some sort of strange feeling too, because I saw him slightly jump up in his seat at the same time that I got this feeling. We looked at each other and we were quiet for a few seconds. Then he asked me if all of a sudden I felt cold. Told him yes. Yeah, I felt cold, and then told him that we should go back to the apartment. We got up, started packing up our trash, walked away from the picnic table and went over to the trash bin, which was to my right. It was near the sidewalk. Turned around, and I can see my friend had stopped and picked up the trash since he was answering a text message on his phone, and well, right behind him on the second picnic table was a shadow figure sitting at the table. I froze and was completely getting chills all over. I automatically assumed, because of my sensitivity to these things, that I was maybe the only one who could see it. My friend then noticed that I was staring behind him. He turned around, my friend jumped back, dropping his phone in the process, and ran over to where I was in panic. I asked him in a whisper if he could see it. He whispered back to me, "Holy shit, is that real?" I told him I could see it as clear as day. We both froze up, stood there super quiet while the shadow just sat there not moving at all. This figure had no discernible shape. It was not in the shape of a person or anything. It was just a round black shadow that only had shoulders and a head. And as I was staring at it, I started to get a sick feeling in my stomach. Started to pray silently in my head that this thing would go away. And suddenly it just randomly vanished. I swear it must have been sitting there for almost the longest 2 or 3 minutes of my life. And as soon as it vanished, We both ran straight to my friend's rental car, with him briefly stopping to grab his phone. Jumped into the car and locked the doors. L started the car, and as he was starting to back up out of the parking space, we both heard 2 bangs on the hood of his car. We screamed. He literally did almost a burnout as we drove away from the parking area. He drove fast as hell to where my apartment building was, parked the first guest parking he saw. We then both literally ran straight to my apartment. Eventually, after a long while, we both managed to calm down and talk about what happened. I explained to him the stuff that had happened to me since I moved to the apartment. He was completely freaked out. Told me to come stay with him in his family's house because he didn't feel safe. Didn't feel safe with me staying there alone, really. And I explained to him it didn't matter. This stuff happens to me all the time at random places. Doesn't matter where I go. After a while of him trying to convince me, I agreed, and we stayed at his family's house for the rest of that week. Obviously, I did have to come back to my apartment after he left. He felt really sympathetic toward me and was genuinely afraid for me. Still lives in another state and calls every once in a while to check up on me. And I, of course, avoided that little park in the apartment complex like the plague after that. Bus stop experience. I had moved into a new apartment with a roommate, which was related to a friend of mine. The apartment was located on the opposite side of town, and I was not familiar with this area when I moved there. A lot of these apartments were literally newly built, but a lot of the lots around the area were still being developed, and it was a very, sort of desolate part of town. Most of this area before construction began was large amounts of old farm areas that were unkept and no longer lived on. My fear was literally a beacon as my aunt explained this to me. The very first event I experienced after moving into my new apartment happened within a week. At the time, I didn't have my own car, and besides getting rides from friends, I mostly had to take a bus to get to work. The bus stop I had to walk to was pretty far away from the apartment complex. There's a lot of new construction everywhere in that road and in front of the complex. But there was a gas station and a very small shopping plaza that was mostly empty except for a bunk and a small mop and mom and pop's, or a small mom and pop grocery store. I used to sometimes stop at this grocery store to get some Starbucks iced coffee before walking up to the bus. One very early morning, I want to say maybe 5:30 a.m., I'm walking to the bus stop, and I know this is bad for a girl to be walking alone, but I had my earbuds in and was just walking along, not really paying attention to my surroundings. And suddenly I got a very cold chill up and down my spine. I got the distinct feeling somebody was walking behind me. I turned around, and obviously no one was there. I got a little nervous, and I left one of my earbuds out just to keep myself a little bit more alert. I continued walking and was almost getting to the shopping plaza when I hear running footsteps behind me. Turned around, continued hearing the footsteps, and basically I'm frozen in fear, and I couldn't move any further, and then I hear something rustle in the bushes next to the sidewalk. It's very close to me, and the footsteps stop. I caught my breath, and for some reason, the energy I felt was not a positive one. So I decided to sprint to the little grocery store in the plaza. Calmed myself down long enough to walk over and buy what I needed. Then I realized I had another 7 or 8 minute walk to get to the bus stop. As I neared the door to leave the store, in the parking lot, I see as clear as day a figure of a man that seems like he was standing in his own fog. Honestly, I couldn't tell any of his features, but as soon as he seemed to realize I saw him completely vanished. I looked around me to see if somebody else had seen it, but it was 5:50 a.m. at this point, and no one in the store was with me except for the person at the register. I gathered my courage and forced myself to walk to the bus stop. And as I'm waiting for the bus to arrive, I again started to feel a shiver and my heartbeat quickened. Got up from the bench where I was waiting and starting to look around, but I couldn't see anything. Then I swear as I breathed, I heard something directly in my ear. It was the voice of a man saying, "I'm sorry." As I'm typing this, I literally have chills just remembering the sound of his voice. I instantly knew it was the figure I had seen in the parking lot. Stood there so freaked out, almost in tears, and the bus finally came to stop to get me. And after this happened to me, paid my friend to drive me to work for the next 2 months. The man behind the glass. Since I was a kid, I've had a few strange, unexplainable things happen to me. But this one is the first time I truly questioned reality. I was about 13, just back from school. I lived in a small apartment building on the second floor, and normally I'd take the elevator because, long day plus heavy backpack equals no stairs, please. But that day, even though my hand reached for the elevator handle, I suddenly pulled back, and I don't know why. Something deep inside whispered, "Don't." So I took the stairs, and on the top right by the door to the corridor, there was a small window high up so kids couldn't really peek through it. Still, when I passed it, I froze. Through that window, I saw an old man, pale, still, and staring at me. Never seen him before. Figured he was living, maybe visiting someone. There were 4 apartments on my floor, but something about him felt off. I grabbed the door handle and I was ready to greet him. The moment my fingers touched it, he vanished. No sound, no movement, just gone. For years, I told myself it was my imagination or maybe a trick of the light. I didn't tell anyone. Even tried to forget his face because it was gray and hollow, like life had been drained out of it. But 6 years later, something happened that brought everything back. My little nephew, he was about maybe a year and a half old, actually. And that's when he was running around my parents' house while we were in the pool. His mom was watching him when suddenly he stopped and stepped back and pointed at the sofa and he started crying. We rushed over and asked what was wrong, and he said, trembling, "Mommy, there's an old man under the sofa." At first, we panicked, thinking maybe somebody broke in. My dad sometimes did come in through the back door after work, but there was no one there, nothing. Just the empty living room and a crying child. 3 years later, when he was older, he mentioned it again, and pretty calm this time. He said he saw the same old man with gray skin, tall and standing right next to my mom, and the way he described that face, it was the same one I saw through the little window. And to this day, I have no idea who he was, but I am sure that we both saw the same man. The Whisper by the River. This is a story my mother told me from her teenage years when she lived in a quiet village tucked deep within one of the Philippine Islands. Happened sometime in the late 1970s. When my mother first entered high school, she met a girl who shared the same first name. They bonded quickly over music and sketches, the way both of them loved to sing while walking home from school. They became inseparable. One morning, her friend didn't show up for class, and the teachers didn't seem too worried, but the whole village was small. People always knew who lived where, and after school, my mother decided to visit her friend's house near the riverbank to check in. But on her way there, a group of classmates stopped her. "Don't go near that house," one of them said. My mother asked, "Why not?" And one girl said with wide eyes, "Because they eat people." My mother rolled her eyes, and she'd heard that rumor before. The family by the river practiced something dark, but she never believed it. Her friend was kind, and her food tasted normal, and her laughter was real. So my mother continued walking. It was 4:30 in the afternoon, and the river shimmered gold with the lowering sun. And then from a distance, my mother saw a woman crouched by the shallow water. She thought maybe the woman was washing clothes or relieving herself, but as she got closer, she noticed something strange. The woman's hair was tangled white, almost glowing against her black dress soaked to the hem. Then my mother heard her murmuring over and over, "I wish the sun would set soon, I wish the sun would set soon." That's basically when my mother's courage broke. She ran home so fast her slippers nearly flew off. That night, she tried to convince herself the woman was just ill, maybe even out of her mind. She blew out the candle lamp beside her mat and lay down on the bamboo floor of the nipa hut. Around midnight, she woke to a faint rustling beneath her. At first, she thought it was a rat. Then she felt a cold pressure against her back, something moving under the bamboo slats. Slowly, between the cracks, bony fingers began to emerge. Long, thin, colorless fingers searching and tapping and feeling. She froze and the fingers withdrew and there was silence. Then she felt them again, pressing through, and this time poking her back, pinching and digging. The pain was sharp and burning, and she couldn't scream, she couldn't breathe. Tears slipped from her eyes in silence. Then suddenly their cat hissed and bolted, knocking over the candle lamp. The noise startled everyone, and my grandfather grabbed his bolo and rushed outside, following the cat's furious screeches. There, in the moonlight, he saw the cat clawing at a large black bird as he raised the bolo. The creature twisted, and its feathers were rippling and its shape blurring until it turned into a wild boar that fled into the trees. Shocked, my grandfather shouted into the darkness, "Come back here and I'll hunt you down myself." He stayed awake, guarding the house until dawn. The next day, my mother went to school, but her friend never came back and no one saw her again. The Man by the River's End. When my grandparents were screwed that up quick. When my grandparents were still newly married, they had a neighbor who was a fisherman. And every dawn, after casting his net in the river, he'd haul his catch to a small bamboo stall at the market square. My grandmother often kind of bought from him. And over time, they became good friends. On days when she was short on cash, the kind man would smile and say, "You can pay me next time, just take the fish." One afternoon, my grandmother noticed a small crowd gathered around the empty stall. The neighbors murmured that the fisherman hadn't showed up for days, and with the village feast coming soon, everybody was hoping he'd return. An old woman decided to check on him, and since my grandmother knew him well, she went along. When they reached his hut near the edge of the forest, the door was locked and windows were shuttered tight. The old woman called out, but a rough voice from inside yelled, "Go away!" And they both froze. My grandmother spoke softly and said, "Tadang, it's me." After a pause, the latch creaked and the fisherman opened the door. The room smelt of salt and damp wood, with piles of salt scattered across the floor. And at one corner stood a long bamboo spear. The fisherman looked exhausted with his eyes sunken and beard unkempt. It's as if he hadn't slept in days. My grandmother asked what was wrong, and he whispered that something or someone had been watching him. He told them it began about a week ago, while fishing by the river. He'd noticed a man standing far away, half hidden among the trees. And at first he thought nothing of it. The man and his wife lived at the farthest end of the river, in a hut few dared to visit. Wanting to be friendly, the fisherman decided to drop by and introduce himself. He greeted the couple with a smile and offered them fish for lunch. The man refused politely, saying they had no money. The fisherman laughed, saying it was a gift. Grateful, they invited him to share lunch with them. The wife began cleaning the fish outside while the man chopped firewood. Waiting inside, the fisherman thought maybe to help season the fish, and he went to look for salt. So he searched the shelves and then the jars under the sink, and that's when he smelled something foul. He opened a jar and nearly fainted because inside were small grayish human fingers. Baby fingers. Terrified, he crawled out through a hole into the bamboo floor and ran. He could hear someone shouting behind him but didn't dare look back. When he finally did, he saw the man from the hut chasing him with his eyes blazing and froth from the mouth. He ran faster than he ever had, praying out loud until he reached the village. And since that day, he never left his house. He said he could hear whispers at night and footsteps on his roof and something scratching his windows. Sometimes someone would whistle, softly, mockingly, trying to lure him out. He spread salt and kept the bamboo spear close, claiming it was the only thing keeping them away. A few days later, the fisherman was gone. His door left ajar, salt scattered everywhere, but no sign of him. Some said he went mad after losing his wife years ago. Others believed the spirits from the river took him. My grandparents said they didn't know what to believe, only that after that day, no one ever fished near the river again. The River and the Wolf. I'm 40 now, but when I was around 15, my uncle lent my parents his cabin up in the far north of Quebec. It's wild country. It took forever to reach that place, driving through endless forests and dirt roads with no neighbors and no electricity, just silence and pines. I loved it there. The land stretched forever, and best of all, a cold, clear river ran straight through it. The water came straight from the mountains, freezing, but pure enough to drink. It had a wicked current, too, because in the deep part it reached my chest and I couldn't even stand against it. One afternoon, I grabbed my float board and I thought, why not hike upriver and let the current carry me back? It sounded brilliant at the time, and I'd been in those woods before. Deer, a couple of bears, nothing major, and I really wasn't scared and shouldn't have been. The hike was gorgeous. And at one point, I spotted a bear cub drinking at the far shore, and it was adorable. Until the mom showed up. She looked at me once, decided I wasn't worth the trouble, and wandered off with her cub, and it gave me false confidence. Honestly, I walked for hours carefree, thinking, you can't get lost if you follow the river, which is idiot logic. Eventually, the path got rough, and there were branches everywhere, and the ground was soft and wet. To stay close to the river, I had to push through thick brush, and I could still see the water glittering through the trees to my left. Then came that feeling. The forest went dead quiet. No wind, no birds, just pressure in the air, and my skin was prickling. I froze because something was on my right, and I turned my head slowly, and there it was. A huge black shape between the trees, two faint yellow eyes staring straight at me. 15 feet away, not moving. Neither of us moved. I realized it wasn't a bear. It was a wolf, black as night, bigger than any bear I'd seen. And it wasn't curious. It was calculating. I remembered my cat once freezing like that before pouncing on a bird. And that was the thought that hit me. I'm the bird. To my left, 10 feet away, was the river, blocked by thorny bushes, and I couldn't really think. I just ran. I crashed through branches, scratched my arms and face, and dove headfirst into the icy water. The current grabbed me, yanked me away like a leaf, and I didn't look back, and I didn't dare. Later, when I told my uncle about the huge black wolf, he laughed and said there weren't any wolves in that area, and it was just my imagination. I mean, maybe he's right, but sometimes even now, when I'm in the woods at night, I still see those two little yellow dots staring from the dark.
Greetings, seekers of the unexplained. Join us at Paranormal M as we unravel stories that challenge the very fabric of reality. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications to be transported to a world of mysteries. Weird ghost-like thing in my dream attacked me last night. What do I do? Not safe for work / trigger warning. You've been warned. This has only been happening for a few days, but it's never been bad like this. It started out as just this lady with pink hair, pure white skin, and a yellow shirt. She would just appear in the corner for a few seconds, then disappear for like half a second, then jump scare me. She never did anything else, and it only happened once per dream. Until last night, that is. She appeared the first time. I was actually able to talk to her this time. I asked her if she was trying to scare me, and she nodded, then jump scared me. After that, I saw her out of the corner of my eye. She didn't do anything, I guess, but I didn't fully look at her. Then the final time that I saw her in the dream is when I get attacked. So this part of the dream had actually happened in my room. I look over and she's hiding in a pile of clothes. Then she disappears and this weird thing appears and runs towards me. It looked like it was 10 years old. It had gray skin, black eyes, no hair. Everything in its mouth was black. It also looked strangely like my sister. Burn. And it was trying to bite my hand. So after that, I wake up and the palm of my hand actually hurt. It actually scared me this time. My friend says that his mom had similar experiences, and she prayed, then it stopped. The same friend thinks that I might need a priest. My grandma thinks that it could be from stress and that I might need a psychiatrist. But I don't know how to explain why I woke up with my hand hurting. Ask Reddit. We live in rural East Texas, and it's what's considered to be the Bigfoot capital of Texas. My family's lived on our property for over 100 years now. In the late fall of 2020, we began having what most would consider to be odd activity on our property. Now to preface, our property is mostly woods and swamp, and it butts up against more properties that are even less visited, and they're also forest and swamp. Some of the neighboring properties only have people visit for a few days each year in deer season, and they're otherwise just vacant of humans all year. And some of the waterways get into pretty dark and isolated stretches of river bottoms. In the evenings around sunset and into the early hours of the night, we began to hear on occasion odd bird-like whistling noises coming from the woods across from the road in the forest and swamp area. Our homes are on the other side of the road from the underdeveloped property, and these weird noises would come from in the woodline near the nightfall sometimes. It sounded like birds whistling and chirping, except it didn't sound exactly like birds. It sounded like something doing a really good job of mimicking bird whistling and chirping. This went on for months, but sadly I never got any audio recordings of anything. My father, an experienced hunter and woodsman, said that he kept trying to locate the source of the noises. But when he would get closer to the woods, the sounds would move away from him, further into the woods. He said it would continue to do so for pretty much almost as if his whatever was making these noises was trying to lure him deeper into the woods. Having seen too many movies, he opted out of that situation and went into the house. This all climaxed in January of 2021, when I went out of the vehicle, and I was just trying to get something from out of the back of the vehicle. And suddenly, from not far into the woodline, I heard the most chilling noise I've ever heard in my life. As I was retrieving my bag, a loud animal-type roar erupted from the woodline near the gate. This gate accesses our property, which is located just opposite of the road of my driveway. I've spent my entire life studying and working with animals, namely exotics. And the best I can compare the sound to was a large male silverback gorilla roaring. I want you to understand that this sound was a primal sound and alarming. I actually mildly pissed myself reflexing. I searched for days on YouTube, and the closest sound I could find was a video of a male gorilla at a zoo suddenly roaring to intimidate some onlookers. And it gets weirder from here still. Not being one to simply assume my family's being haunted by some monster, I decided to grab my headlamp, sidearm an AK-47 rifle, and head down into the woods to see what was making these sounds. I wish I could say I saw a huge Sasquatch and had some epic shootout, but I didn't. I sat in my vehicle in the woods in total darkness for some time. I even played the Sierra sounds over my vehicle speakers to see if anything would show up, but sadly and perhaps thankfully, nothing did. However, before leaving the woods, I headed back up to our cabin to make sure everything was normal around the cabin. We've actually had people break in before, so I wanted to make sure everything was as it should be. I searched the immediate area with my headlamp and rifle, and while there were some large animal that stayed just out of my line of sight due to thick undergrowth, I'm mostly certain that it was a feral pig, which can get very large and quite dangerous, frankly. The oddest part of all of this is that when I checked the slough, a semi-permanent body of standing water, near our cabin, there was an animal in the tree I still cannot identify. This small animal was about 2 feet tall, sitting on its haunches, and about 1 foot wide. It had no obvious or visible tail, and appeared to clearly have 4 appendages. It was invisibly some sort of mammal, but since the water was higher than normal due to the wet winter, I couldn't get a better angle or get close to it without wading out into the icy water. This animal had silver-colored fur with texture rather similar to that of a chinchilla. And for all my attempts, it would never show its face or paws, as it kept all those distinguishing features tucked into its body like it was sleeping, despite it clearly reacting to the sounds I made on the ground. I've tried for everything that I can think to identify this creature. It was not an opossum. It was not a raccoon. It was not an owl or young owl with downy feathers. I cannot explain this animal with any of the local species of fauna, even if it had some health issues like mange. The closest thing that I've been able to find is a silvery gibbon, which are obviously not native to eastern Texas. My wife still half jokes that I found a baby Sasquatch tucked away in a tree by its parent, and I honestly don't know what to think about all of this. But after that night, we haven't had any more strange activity that I'm aware of. I'm a very open-minded yet rational person. I've grown up in these woods. I've studied and kept numerous animal species. I've helped with government ecological projects in our area. I have taught biology and ecology classes, but this will baffle me for the rest of my life. Did I find a baby Sasquatch? Seance. Around age 16 to 19, I was watching my youngest sibling, just doing homework, 12 years younger than myself, but very bright, so we'd print out advanced homework for her. Probably closer to 18 or 19, I suppose, given her cognitive ability at the time. My middle sibling, Jade, was out with a friend at a sleepover, and my mom and stepdad were out working. Now, keep in mind, it wasn't uncommon for us to be watching things like Ghost Hunters or other paranormal shows. But often when we did, the doors in the halls would slam or lights would turn off and on. I avoided those shows for that very reason back then, because I used to be uncomfortable with the houses that we'd pick. While I was in the upstairs front room with my youngest sibling, home alone, watching TV on the couch, she's sitting on the floor doing homework on the coffee table. Randomly, the lights flicker in our 1940s house, while the TV remains stable, and I hear, "Where's Jade?" Freaked out, but I stone-face it, with my heart beating 1,000,000 miles a minute. I was thinking, that can't be good. Is she okay? If it's asking her about what she means, maybe she got into an accident? Am I the only one that heard that? After a little bit, though, my youngest sibling turned around from homework and asked me, "Where's Jade?" Like this has to be something from a horror movie or something. If I hadn't lived this stuff myself, I don't know if I'd ever believe that this could even happen. I'm not sure if my eyes actually widened when I asked, but I tried to play it off as to not scare her, but I asked why she asked. She told me that it was because she heard somebody else ask, which of course did not make me feel any better. But it did make me more concerned, so I called out middle sister, 3 years younger than myself, Jade. She didn't answer, and I didn't know if she was ignoring me or couldn't answer for me. But I knew that she'd answer for our mom, so I called our mom and asked what Jade was doing. She told me she was sleeping over at a friend's. I told her that the lights flickered and we both just heard, "Where's Jade?" So, we weren't sure if maybe she was in an accident or what had happened. My mom was now panicked and she called Jade, but called me back and told me that she was having a seance with her friends. So this seance my sister had elsewhere caused a spirit in my own house to come looking for her, and many of the ones in that house did not feel friendly. The portal in that basement scared me any time I passed it to go upstairs. Gumpy. When I was really little, I remember my great-grandpa playing with me, and I'd tell my great-grandma, Nana, and my mom all about it. I didn't grow up with my dad around, and I never really kept in touch with my Nana's ex-husband, but I remember my great-grandpa very well. My family would often just listen to my stories about him, and I recall his funeral even. And I even recalled the fact that he had an open casket funeral. I remember my Nana taking me to the funeral, getting out of the car, and when we got there, no one listening to me when I was trying to talk. I remember that memory of my family before any other memory of any other people living in my family. When I was probably 6, my Nana took me, and I think either one of my uncles or third cousins' houses. And I saw a lot of really good sketches of my great-grandpa. Some of them were sketches of very similar drawings. One of my great-grandma kept up all the time in her house. She asked me if I knew who it was, and I called him Gumpy. My Nana was shocked. That was not a name anyone had called him in a long time, and he had passed years ago. I knew he passed a long time ago, and I'd heard bits and pieces about that, but it's not something people really discussed much in the family. Just that he passed from a heart attack in another country on a mission. The story still gets weirder. When I was younger, my Nana and Mom got T-boned by a big truck of some type. I've heard different stories of what kind of truck from my aunt, Mom, and Nana. They can all only agree that it was a giant truck, and the other part of the story. They said it was maybe 2 and that I had a sunshade in my window. Other people had scratches and broken bones, but it looked like somebody had picked me up and sat me down on top of the broken glass, then set the sunshade on top of me. The paramedics were confused how I had not one scratch on me and how I had glass directly underneath me. My mom and Nana both saw a figure dressed in white across the street on a corner walking away that looked exactly like my great-grandpa. They asked the other driver if they saw a man in the white across the street, and he didn't see anyone, he claimed. It continues. When I was maybe 9, my mom used to ask me how I'd color perfectly within the lines, a skill I no longer have today. I used to tell her that Gumpy and Joey, my cousin who passed when I was maybe a toddler, they helped me. When I was about 15, we visited my grandpa's grave again, and I noticed something. The year of his death on his grave was years before I was born. I thought about that for a while. One night at my grandma's, I asked her, my Nana and my mom, why they never questioned my stories about Grandpa if he died years before I was born. They referenced the night when I saw the sketches and I called him Gumpy. I didn't understand. They told me that no one calls him Gumpy anymore. Only kids called him Gumpy when they were kids years before I was born, and it's one of the things that nobody talks about anymore. So it's not something I could have just picked up. So when I called him by that name, they just simply had to believe me. Ghost or toast? What do you think? This one is a weird one. I'm still not sure what to make of it. It seems everybody has different thoughts on it. Some of my friends that were there didn't believe me at all at first, but it freaked me out when they told me their side. This takes place on a hike around Arlington, Washington in 2022 with a big group of friends. And I'll explain a few different theories at the end, including ghosts, of course. Of course, no signal in the area. We all went to the same high school, and all except the youngest brother, and obviously the kids, are in our 30s. It was myself, 3 brothers, youngest to oldest, B, J2, and Z, a married couple, J1 and S, and their 2 little girls, one being a baby. They were also smart and bought a little red baby carrier. I also explicitly recalled the shirt S was wearing because while they got the kids ready at the cars, I commented on it because I liked it and we talked about it. And I paid a little bit more attention to what people were wearing that day than I would otherwise. By the time we got to the area, I already had a coffee and also bought 2 giant water bottles. On top of the long drive, but there were no bathrooms, obviously, so I had to hold it. Thankfully, it was only supposed to be a quick 2 miles in and out of sort of a trail, and it was supposed to be pretty easy according to the app that I used. I hiked solo regularly. Once everyone arrived, we all started heading down the trail, which started pretty easy. But then we quickly started to regret our decision. The app was definitely not accurate about this trail. It was pretty steep going downhill and zigzagged quite a bit. Later, it evened out again, just for a while, and then it went really steep and made us jump over some rocks in a small stream, I think. It certainly was a challenge for my friend's kid and my very full bladder as we exceeded 2.5 miles. And following that, there was also a giant fallen tree, which I really didn't look forward to climbing over between my bladder and nausea, probably in part from also chugging so much water on the hike. I decided this was it for me. After scaling the tree, I didn't want to go any further at that point, so I let them go ahead without me. There was a big discussion. I was leaning against the fallen tree with all of them looking at me, and they knew when I go on my hikes I like to sit by rivers or waterfall for a while and just in the middle of my hike, sort of a thing. B, Z, and S all found a very steep way down to the flowing river beneath us and told me that I could go down there. I declined and told them that I'd just hang out by this tree and wait for them. They asked if I was sure, and I told them yes. J1 and S, especially J1, probably since I'd known him the longest, were trying to make sure that I wouldn't leave to go back to the cars alone. I reassured them that I'd stay there and I'd wait for them to get back. I have no reason to leave without them. Shortly after they left, I had a few moments where I felt like I could try to make it down, so I did try to go down to the river. As challenging as it was, since my hiking boots provided no ankle support, I succeeded and found a rock to sit on and watch the water rush past me. After a few minutes or so, I suddenly heard my name being yelled from a distance to my right. So I looked over and saw everybody waving a bit above, and probably another, maybe quarter mile, half a mile away. I waved back at them, but I was enjoying my time at the river. Normally I have a really loud metal music sort of a thing blasting on my hikes, and then I take out my earbuds at the river or the stream when I'm secluded in a small area away from others to hear the water, birds, squirrels, or just nature in general. It makes it more refreshing to me, but it was still good. When I looked back, I saw everyone was gone, so I was now on guard, making sure I didn't miss them at the top of the hill from the river. After about half a minute, I decided, putting my backpack on and realizing how steep it was having to go to the bathroom, maybe I should probably start heading up at least, so they're not waiting on me. I could see it in my head already. They'd be sitting there telling me to hurry up while I'll be trying not to pee all over myself and climbing back up, especially as clumsy and uncoordinated as I am. Why didn't you just pee outside? But I then heard people walking, so I hurried to, a clearing of trees. That's where I tried to climb back up, and I caught just a glimpse of a few people. One was a girl with hair and the same color shirt as S, and another guy that looked like B, and another guy that looked like J1. But I was at the bottom of the river and they didn't even stop. None of them. I didn't see J2, Z, or S. And J1's oldest kid, but none of them stopped or anything. I was really confused because they told me to wait and not go back to the cars. But I figured maybe they saw me or something and knew I'd just catch up. I started scrambling to get to the top of the little hill back to the trail. No one was there. I jumped back over the fallen tree to head back and ran back down the hill over the rocks and stream, and as I ran as fast and as far as I could, but then I just stopped because I had a feeling that something was just feeling weird. I stopped for probably 5 minutes in this really open area that was surrounded by, straw. I had a big internal struggle debating if I should wait, go back, or if I should keep going towards the cars to try to catch up, quote-unquote, and even ask other people if I was on the right track if they passed. Eventually, I decided that they wouldn't come if they were behind me. And that really looked like S, J1, and B up on that hill. And even on what I thought logically to be a 3% chance that it wasn't them, I was sure that they knew me well enough to know I'm experienced enough solo with hiking to know that I'd be fine. And they could just meet me there, obviously. I would go hiking every weekend for years by myself to different trails and different areas. And my family used to go when I was young, too. Plus, my bladder was going to burst at any moment, so the sooner I could make more progress, the better. I did eventually pass a group going the other direction, so as I came up on them, I thought, lady with a dog, few guys behind her, but she's in front and not talking like they are. This is the perfect opportunity to ask somebody. She'd probably know. As we were passing, I quickly asked if she had seen a big group of guys and a girl with 2 kids, one in a red baby carrier. She told me, yeah, they're right ahead. You're hot on their trail. I thought to myself that was perfect. I was right. It was them that passed me on the trail. I tried using every burst of energy I could whenever I didn't have that immediate urge to squat over a bush to pee. Eventually, I neared the end of the trail where it zigzagged probably at least 5 times. And they weren't short either. I made it around the corner before I heard someone yelling my name from behind, but I had to stop because my bladder was going to burst at any moment. I turned around and saw the youngest brother, Z, running up from me. I looked at him in confusion and asked him why he was back there. He was confused. What was I talking about? I asked if everybody else was at the cars, and he told me everybody else was out looking for me. Everybody was behind. I was thoroughly confused now. If everybody's behind, who did I see at the top of the trail? Who did the lady see? This trail is definitely not child or dog friendly with trees like that, especially small dogs like that one she had. I told Z the lady with the dog and the group of guys said that they were all right ahead and I was hot on their trail. He said, "What lady with a dog?" They didn't pass anybody on the way back, and I didn't see them returning either. It didn't fork off anywhere either. They couldn't have gone anywhere else. He ran back to the group and I had to press on ahead with any moment I couldn't spare otherwise. I'd never make it back to the cars because I had to go like now, and the steep hills were making it harder to hold it, and hold my balance too. It had been hours at this point. Everybody else caught up and asked about what happened, and I told them I thought that they already went ahead and they thought I was making it all up. When we eventually got back to the cars, we decided that it was well past lunch and we were all getting hungry, and we had a long drive home. J1 and S also had a these acronym names jump me up. J1 and S also had a much longer drive home. J2 lived pretty close, B, Z, and I all lived near the high school that we all went to, so we still lived between everyone. But we decided to go get food. At the restaurant, I explained in detail what happened, and the more everyone denied having seen any of the people I'd mentioned passing them, the weirder it was. They told me they stayed and looked around everywhere for me. They looked for any traces of my hair or bag, thinking that I may have fallen into the river. How was it possible 5 other adults didn't have any of these sightings of these people that I saw? I described everything I could recall about the lady and her dog, and the little I recalled of the guys behind her. I've heard multiple theories. One of them told me that I was just making it up. One person told me, and I thought it could have been maybe a very long and weird hallucination. I've been told that it could have been ghosts. And one friend I've known for years told me that because I'm chaos, quote unquote, he's not the only one to tell me that I'm chaos, and just everything around me is always just chaos by no fault of my own. Even my partner feels that way. He told me that he's been trying to do research on missing 411. I hadn't heard of this, but abductions of people that seemingly disappear usually in the middle of nowhere. And he thought I saw people that weren't people, but due to the fact that I basically exude chaos, I was lucky and escaped. Are shadow people following me? I tried to condense as much as possible, but it spans most of my life. SP refers to sleep paralysis, and before 22, all of this takes place in Aurora. I have SP undiagnosed, but one of the first memories I have is waking up in my bed, probably about age 10-ish, and not being able to move but seeing a very tall, gray being resembling what most people would call an alien, hiding in the corner of my room. I remember not feeling scared, but more startled that something was in my space. About 4 years later, we moved to this very old Victorian house, one of the first built in the city. Sometimes in the summer, I would play video games in the basement to escape the heat, and right above where my TV would sit, there was a hole in the wall leading to the crawl space underneath the house that was pitch black and very ominous. While down there one day, I went into a sort of trance, and when I came to, I was still sitting there, where I was, but staring blankly into the dark hole for an unknown amount of time. The house was so old that it had 2 sets of stairs, one for the people living there and the other for the servants. One day I was headed down the servants' stairs, staring at my feet and looking up to see a girl at the end of the stairs in a white gown with black hair in her face. Almost exactly like that look of the girl in The Ring. Another time I was home alone and I heard something upstairs run from one room to the other, and it was so loud that my dog stood up and looked at me. I did go upstairs to check every room, but as usual, I found nothing. No issues for years that I remember. And then fast forward to about age 22. SP is worse than ever, and at this point I cannot sleep without having the feeling that something's watching me. It's interesting to note that when I would go somewhere very far, like being deployed to other countries, I would be okay for about a month, and it would start again almost like it took a while to travel and find me. Then I started seeing things, while not having been asleep. At one point, I can't remember if I'd fallen asleep or if I was in the process, but I looked up and saw the same girl as before from the Victorian house on my ceiling, right above my bed. I jumped up and turned on the light and it was gone. After that incident, I never slept without a light on ever again, and it didn't really help. At the beginning of 2021, 27 at the time, I would try to fight my body to try to get it to move during SP more and more. After fighting it so much, I would start waking up without being able to move, but also hear loud ringing in my ears and feeling extra dizzy, almost like being hit by a stun grenade. I also started hearing noises of something being moved or manipulated, like someone touching or moving things. Some things would fall randomly, but not very often. I also bought a townhome, and I always heard loud walking and scratching in my upstairs crawl space while completely awake. My girlfriend also hears it and refuses to sleep upstairs when it happens. I went to check when she begged me to go look in the middle of the night, and there was nothing there. Not even a place an animal could get into. I also had an incident where my girlfriend was crying downstairs in the dark while visiting me. Her dog ran away back home, and she looked up to see what appeared to be me standing there by the stairs, shrouded in darkness. Not being able to see the front of the form due to the dark, she called out thinking it was me. There was no response, and when she wiped her tears and looked back, it was gone. Recent events that made me question my skepticism. Last winter, my wife, daughter, and I were staying at my wife's parents'. They live in a pretty old and pretty small house, and notably the only one on the street that hasn't been rebuilt within the last 20 years or so. It's still an original brick construction, as opposed to more modern wood build, and this is in Arizona. The house is very cozy and homely, but my wife and her sisters have always had various creepy feelings about this house. I believe they meant homey, not homely. MIL is also very religious and superstitious, and has a few ghost stories about the house. I've always loved ghost stories, but never been able to believe a word of them. I like that spooky feeling of but what if it is true? But I can only hold on to it for a moment, and I've never been able to convince myself that the paranormal is real in any physical sense. Anyway, on to the story. I work fully remote, and I'd rented a local co-working space for our stay in Arizona. The main office is on the East Coast, so I was routinely up at 6:30 a.m. to get to the office space in time for their 9 a.m. calls. One morning, the co-working space was randomly closed. A leak in the building or something. No big deal. I just drive back to the house and set up in the kitchen table. During my morning Zoom call, I hear my mother-in-law leave the room to head to the bathroom, and she gives me a cheery good morning. Can't exactly remember why, but I just ignored her. I think it was a combination of being tired, coffee not kicked in yet, and also trying to concentrate on the call. Also, she has a habit of not understanding what a Zoom call even is, and will just strike up a conversation when you're mid-meeting, and I wanted to avoid that too. Don't blame you. I waited to hear the bathroom door close or the TV turn on or something, but didn't hear any of the follow-up. I suddenly got this disgusting feeling of being watched, presumably because I'd heard the good morning but no follow-up on the movement of my mother-in-law who said it. My head snapped 90 degrees to my left to look down the corridor. It's just slightly out of my peripheral vision from where I was sitting at the kitchen table. Nothing there. The only rational explanation for this is that my mother-in-law had to come out of her room. She said good morning and then immediately went back in, but that just felt unlikely to say the least. She has trouble sleeping typically and goes to bed at 3 or 4 a.m., and we see her about noon. And remember, it was like 7 a.m. at that point. The feeling was too creepy to ignore, despite being a supposed skeptic. I repositioned myself entirely on the kitchen table so my back was to the safety of the corner, with my eyes straight down the corridor. Needless to say, when I quizzed my mother-in-law when she woke up, she said that she definitely hadn't come out. She definitely didn't say good morning to me, and also nervously laughed and declared, "Yep, there's a spirit in this house, that's for sure." She's really superstitious, so it didn't surprise me that she said such a blanket statement. But for the first time, I couldn't really disagree with her. Nothing happened for the rest of that working day, and these experiences have an eerie half-life. Almost like the further you get from them, the more you question if it actually happened. Has anyone else experienced this too? The next oddity occurred later that evening. At around 5:30 p.m., I was lying on the couch with my wife watching Family Guy. I was just drifting off to sleep. I'm no stranger to sleep paralysis, and I typically suffer from it when I fall asleep on my back, which I was doing on the sofa. The next thing I know, I'm in sleep paralysis. My typical experience with this is to take a very few deep breaths. It's the only thing I can control while I'm paralyzed, and it usually shakes me out of it. The typical experience for me also has never involved the demon. My sleep paralysis episodes, if you can call them that, are always just black, as if my eyes are closed. This time, though, for the first time ever, I could actually see the room. I see a little boy walk in, climb on the sofa, then sit on my chest, just like how my daughter would do if she wanted to play or something. I couldn't make out a face, but I know that he had shorts and a blue-collar shirt. He was maybe 3 or 4 years old. It didn't really feel creepy or anything, and I was hyper-aware that I was in sleep paralysis too, so my logical brain was kicking in, I guess. But it was still very weird that it was happening, considering, like I say, my sleep paralysis is always just blackness, no hallucinations. After a few more of my deep breath tactics, I woke up. The instant I woke up, my daughter ran in. She's not even 2 years old yet, and says, "Oh, anybody here?" And then ran out back to her mom, making her scared whine noise. At this point, I'm actually spooked. My daughter's vocabulary is hello, please, and cookies, yet she formed a whole sentence for the first time ever. I know kids pick up on new language all the time, and as a parent, you can't keep track of where they pick it up, but in that moment, it really freaked me out. I now had this growing narrative of some kind of an evil mother who tries to bait you in with pleasantries, and then a sad child looking for comfort or help. That shit really fucked me up to think about. I had to really try hard to squash paranoia for the rest of our stay there. Because for the first time ever, my logical brain had no comeback for the events that happened. If it wasn't for that sleep paralysis event, I don't think I would have thought anything of it. But the good morning incident from when I was very much awake really connected to some spooky dots for me. I'll give one final related anecdote from my mother-in-law. That will allow me to sort of tie this together and throw out our theory. When my wife's older sister had moved out, there was finally a spare room. Mother-in-law had always been looking to move into a spare room because father-in-law snores too loud. This spare room was always the aforementioned quote-unquote creepy room, the one that my wife and her sisters always had terrible vibes about. No further information about that, mind you, just a feeling. So when mother-in-law first moved into the spare room, she started having the worst sleeps of her life, and nightmares, paranoia, lying awake until the sun came up, shadowy figures in the corner, but I guess that could easily just be her sleep paralysis, huh? One night she had such an overwhelming sense of dread that she threw herself out of bed and shouted, "Whatever you are, I'm not afraid of you. Go and find the light. My heavenly Father and always will be protecting me." In that moment, she felt an enormous weight off of her shoulders and had the best sleep of her life, according to her. I'd heard that story before, and I took it with many grains of salt. But given my experience, here's my theory. Did she direct some evil presence from her room out into the corridor, where it still remains? The Mimic. A little background info. 2 years ago, me and my family moved across states. We moved into my current home. We always have a lot of people at our house, and my family is usually outside on the porch. Some family was supposed to be flying back to the state that we moved from that day. I was getting home from school last year, and I was walking through the door. My mom was walking past into her room, and I called out to her. She didn't answer me, so I brushed it off, because she was probably just having her selective hearing. My dad was outside smoking, so I went outside and gave him a kiss and a hug to let him know that I got home. I sat down and told him that I saw my mother walking into her room and joked that she'd ignored me. My dad gave me a confused look and told me that she was at the airport dropping people off. I thought that he was joking with me and laughed, saying that she probably forgot something and was just getting it. I pulled up my phone to look at her location to, prove she was here, and it said she was 45 minutes away at the airport. My dad looked at me weird and said, "I told you so." But the thing with my mom is, it's that she's kinda short. My sisters and I are all a couple inches taller than her. She also dyes her hair like an orange color. One of my sisters has black hair and the other one has a dirty blonde. No one really looks like her. What's really the kicker to this story is that a week ago or something, we were all talking out loud about ghost experiences, like a group of me, my dad, and my mom. I retold my story and my dad got this look on his face. He does that face when he doesn't want to say something scary. I pressed him on it, and turns out something similar happened to him. My dad's from Morocco, and his mom visits from time to time in the States. One time when she was supposed to be in Morocco, he saw her walking up the steps to go upstairs. He was home alone, like me and my sisters were at school and work, and my mom was at my aunt's house. He chills on the couch a lot, and from sitting where he usually does, you can see the top portion of the stairs in our house. He, being the man he is, walked up the steps after he saw, and she just disappeared upstairs. He gets upstairs and see her walk into the room that she would have used to live in when she'd lived with us. My dad walked into the room, and obviously no one was in there. So apparently we have an entity that likes to mimic mothers. Oh, and I saw my mother completely solid. It looked like my mother even down to wearing what she wore that morning. I think I met myself. I saw someone who looks exactly like me, and she was wearing my lost earrings. I was sober at the time because I was driving, and I was hydrated, so the possibility of it being a hallucination is ruled out. I was at the mall a little over a month ago, and I went to this one store because it was having a huge sale, and my mom said that store, or I guess she just seems to like that store, so we went in. It wasn't too crowded at the time, but there was a decent amount of people there. On our way to the checkout, my mom gets in line and tells me to see if there's any remaining things that I want. So after surveying all the other items, I grab 2 candles and I turn around, and I'm almost face to face with someone who looks exactly like me, but younger. When I was younger, I'm talking like 13, 14, and I'm a senior now, so not too long ago. I had curly hair with blonde highlights, natural, and used to dress a lot differently. She had the exact same hair I had before, and this was before I dyed it. I first dyed it around 8th grade, curl pattern and all. 3 piercings on each ear, just like I have, and this same pair of distressed jeans I wore religiously. What really made me freak out was the earrings. I lost a pair of earrings that my mom gave me. They were her birthstone, and she was wearing them. She was fucking wearing them. Earrings I thought I would never see again, right in front of my eyes on someone who looks just like me. I don't even remember the rest of the day. I was pinching myself on the way out. I've been thinking about it this whole summer. I have a photographic memory, so I remember seeing the exact same birthmarks I have on my face, exactly the same as hers. I heard that it wasn't a great idea to make eye contact with the presumed doppelganger, so I just noped the fuck out of there. I'm not sure if I met my doppelganger or if it was possibly a younger version of myself. All I know is that I have this gut-wrenching feeling that I'm going to see her again. Does anyone know what this means? Did I predict a death through my dreams? It happened around last year. It's been in the back of my mind for a while, and I haven't really shared this with many people. I'm not a frequent dreamer, but whenever I dream, it's usually relevant to my real-life situations. So when this happened, it stuck with me. I went to sleep one night, a normal day, normal night. I went to sleep as usual, but I had a vivid dream. I was in a hospital bed, and I could hear the sounds around me. Quiet chatter, distant coughing, beeping. Everything was blurry, but I looked down and I saw I was wearing a hospital gown, and I had some things on my arm. Only it wasn't me. I felt like I was physically losing a battle while I was doing nothing. Laying there trying to figure out who, what, where, then, why, how all this was even happening. Then everything faded as I closed my eyes. I heard fast approaching footsteps and I opened my eyes. I was in my room, in my bed. I sat up to check the time and any notifications that I had. You know, those annoying Instagram notifications like so-and-so made a post on Instagram or something. I had received one of those since I was pretty dormant in my account there at the time. And I clicked on it accidentally. I say accidentally because of what happens next. A post of people sending their regards to someone who had passed away of a fatal illness. I'm not saying who, just out of privacy and respect, but I felt like I experienced his passing with them. I was acquainted with this individual, and I had a very good impression of them, but never knew them quite well. But I feel their presence, oddly enough. I'm just wondering, why me? Why me if I didn't really have a strong connection with this individual? The strangest moment. I was a kid, maybe 12, Sleeping in my bedroom, I woke up in the normal dark room sometime after midnight, needing to pee. The bathroom was just across the hallway from my room, but my bedroom floor was covered in Legos. As I'm sure many know, stepping on Legos can be incredibly painful, especially in the middle of the night when you need to go pee. I agree. As this agonizing thought struck me, the light in my room turned on. Instinctively, I turned my door, thinking somebody had flipped the light switch. The switch was indeed flipped, but I was alone and the door was closed. Despite being fairly freaked out, I simply couldn't fathom anything paranormal. Now that I could see the floor, I went to the light switch, confirmed it was on, opened the door and looked around, thinking perhaps, weirdly, someone was playing a trick on me. But no. If after midnight and everybody was asleep, this couldn't be possible. I went to the bathroom and returned to bed. The moment has stuck with me ever since. There's a lot of outlandish ideas I'm willing to believe, like the light switch not being properly turned off to begin with, and just so happening to turn on at that moment. Which seems like the most probable, but the odds are pretty extreme. I promised my 13-year-old self I'd kill myself at 16. I turned 16 and I think I'm being haunted. When I was 13 during lockdown, I became chronically depressed. It wasn't overly severe, but it was noticeable. I'd never had a real goal in life, and my relationships were abusive and manipulative. You know, the type of relationships where you want to satisfy the other person so you do what they say no matter what, and then you realize it's bad. Yeah, those ones mostly. But anyway, things have gotten so bad back when I attempted twice that year, and after that I promised myself that day that when I turned 16, it would be the last day here. I turned 16 2 days ago, and I completely forgot about the promise. The party was amazing. I'm not from America, so it was a sweet 16 type of a thing, but it was still enjoyable. I spent time with my friends and we had a few drinks after. Nothing special. Another yesterday when I was messaging my boyfriend, the promise came back to me, and it felt like I was hallucinating. It will sound weird to some people, but I saw my 13-year-old self standing by my door with a mad look in her eyes. I've experienced seeing spirits and hearing things that weren't from this world, but this was different. I was seeing someone who hasn't yet died, so how could this be? I wasn't panicking because, as I said, I was sort of used to this, but she kept trying to get my attention. She stayed on my bed, and as I kept ignoring her, she grabbed my wrist and started digging her fingers into my wrist. I still showed no sign of fear. I knew I could control her because, well, she was me, right? Usually when I see a spirit and I'm busy and just not in the mood to keep them company, I tell them in my head, please leave me alone, and it usually works. I've done it many times, although she refused. I tried telling her to leave, but my thoughts kept getting changed. Leave clearly wasn't a part of her vocabulary. After 10 or so minutes, she left my room, and minutes after, my brother started crying next door. This was a snap point for me, as I care about my brothers more than myself. I rushed to my brother's room and calmed him down. Then after that, she left. Weird, manipulative powers guy. When I lived in Austin sometime around 2015, I went to the Verizon store to pay my bill one time. And when I was in there was this middle-aged guy getting set up with whatever the newest Galaxy phone was at that time. Not sure which one it was, but it was expensive. And this dude comes in that looks sort of like a human from Ratatouille. But if he hadn't slept in weeks and was bleach blonde. He had really dark circles around his eyes and just generally looked sickly. He gets up beside the guy and tells him, You should sell that to me for $20. And the guy laughs, thinking he's just joking around. But then he looks up to the guy and he's holding a $20 bill between his fingers with his arms straight out. The second the creepy dude locks eyes with him, the middle-aged guy starts to slowly hand the dude his new phone. But his arm is shaking and it looked like he's trying so hard to not do it. Like he's fighting his own body to prevent himself from doing it, but failing while locking eyes with this guy with a horrified look on his face the whole time. Well, eventually, creepy guy gets the phone and starts to walk off in the middle of the aged guy freaking out, regretting it and panically going, "Why did I do that?" over and over again. I thought he was just scared of the guy or something. So I went after him to try to get the dude's phone back, and eventually I find him outside. And he looks me in the eyes and says, "You should get out of my way." And I'm not kidding at all. I felt like I got transported to somewhere else, and the only way to get back to reality was to just obey this guy. Like when he talked to me, the whole world around me just got dim and sort of blurry, and it's like I was in a tunnel with just him in front of me. That was the one clear thing and normal-looking thing, and my eyes were ringing. The longer I didn't listen to him, the worse it got, and the more I felt like I was, away from where I actually was. It was then that I realized what this guy felt and why he did what he did. It's one of the few unexplainable events in my life. I've met sociopaths, master manipulators, and creepy people like that, but this guy was working on a whole different level. It was absolutely creepy. Vampire Woman. When I was a boy around 6 or 7, I lived with my parents and my younger brothers in this one-bedroom apartment in Pasadena, California. My brothers and I had the bedroom, and my parents would sleep on a fold-out couch in the living room. One night, from seemingly out of nowhere, I began having these dreams. A woman would come to my window. I slept on the top bunk bed, and open my screen and turn me over to face her. She never said who she was, but I remember her being in maybe her early 20s. Really blonde, fine hair, and a very pale complexion. She had elongated teeth where the canines would be. I was instantly petrified. She would speak to me and ask me questions. I never answered, but she kept talking to me anyway. She told me to call her the Scary Head. She would eventually leave and roll over and sleep, and I would just wake up in the morning. I told my parents about my dream, but when you're that young and have an imagination, all kinds of things are sort of just played down to, "Oh, you must have just watched a scary movie," or stuff like that. Every night for a week, this woman would come to my window at night to visit me. It was horrifying each and every time. I would try to stay up and beg my parents not to send me to bed. But parents versus kids, parents usually won. The very last time I saw her, maybe the 6th or 7th night, she appeared to me again, but this time she wasn't alone. She had another woman with her, probably about the same age, but this one had long dark hair that was put in kind of like a stylized bun or something. She had a striped shirt on, with a jean jacket and a jean shirt. She was smoking a cigarette and had on thick sunglasses, even though it was like 2 a.m. She stood in the background and never spoke to me. After that night, the visit stopped. I never saw her again. I was pretty relieved. I went back to being just a normal kid and totally forgot about all of it. Then one night, a few weeks later, I have the same dream. This time, someone wearing a mask that sort of resembles Swamp Thing. It looked like a mask from what I remember. So it comes to my window and turned me to face them. This person, thing, whatever, told me that they are really the Scary Head, and that they had scared the women off. They told me this woman wanted to be with me, and that's why she kept coming back to see me, but that this head would keep me safe. Despite the appearance of the face and the mask, I was not afraid and I felt a strange sense of comfort. After that, they left and that was it. I never had another dream with any of them. The following morning, my dad was up early to do some work around the front of the apartment. He found the screen that covers my window pulled off and laid against the side of the building. I don't know what the dreams were really meaning or if they were even dreams at all. If this woman was real, then why was she coming to the window of a 7-year-old boy to terrify him every night for a week? 1 or 2 nights, sure, asshole teenager having a laugh, whatever. But this woman, 35 years old now, and I've never ever forgotten her face. The way her teeth looked, or how pale she was, or how she was totally absent of any color. And with my dad finding the screen, I was never really able to get any answers, but that experience definitely stuck with me. I believe I banished an entity. Intro. I, a 24-year-old female, believe I banished an entity. Let's rewind back a few. In 2021, I rented my second apartment, which happened to be above a vacant store in a rundown old building in Queens, New York. Upon seeing the place, it was quite old, unkept, and the energy was very heavy and eerie. However, this was during the height of COVID, the only apartment that I could find within my price range at the time. So I jumped at the offer. My first night there, I was very uncomfortable and uneasy. It seemed as soon as I set foot in that apartment, the atmosphere changed and was weighing me down. I brushed it off to just being the fact that I was in a new space. Nonetheless, I always felt I was being watched and that I was not wanted there by something or someone. It wasn't long before these things began occurring, which began confining me into one room. It started with the door slamming, knobs turning, footsteps, and progressively got worse from there. First example. On one instance, I was in bed on my phone scrolling, and I was interrupted by deodorant flying off my dresser and hitting the wall. It scared me tremendously, but I tried to make excuses in my head on what may have caused it to ease my own mind. Second example. Another instant, I'd fallen asleep on the couch while watching TV. I was woken up by 3 taps on my shoulder. Once again, I convinced myself that my mind was just playing tricks on me. I ended up getting up at that point, being too freaked out to go back to sleep, and I decided to grab a soda. I was mildly irritated that I hadn't put any in the fridge. I opened the can, took a few sips, and sat it by my coffee table. Then proceeded to lay back down on the couch and watch TV. After a while, out of the corner of my eye, I see the can moving and hear as it drags against the table, scooting from one side to the other. I'm terrified at this point and frozen in fear. I try not to acknowledge that I saw it in hopes of not making it a reality. Third example. Another incident I recall is being asleep in bed and suddenly being woken up by my blanket being slowly pulled off of me. At this point, I was sleeping with my TV on, too scared to be in the dark with all this stuff occurring. Anyway, I'm the type of sleeper to have sort of a comforter over my head because it's just soothing. So the feeling that my blanket is no longer over my head made me wake up. But I was paralyzed with fear as I watched my comforter slowly pull down by my feet. Eventually, I jumped up and slept in the living room. Now, I could go on and on about all the weird things that I experienced, but I'd be typing forever and a day. Fourth example, and conclusion. However, I was still trying to convince myself all of these incidences I had were just had a simple logical reasoning and explanation for how it happened. Until my best friend came over one day. We laid in bed together on our phones, not saying a word. Our silence was interrupted by a bottle of lotion that was sat on top of my dresser, flying across my room and hitting the wall. We both stared at each other, and we say nothing for a moment. She then proceeds to tell me, "I know you seen that just now. You have a fucking ghost in here." And I informed her that I knew that, but I was in denial about it, until that being that someone else finally witnessed it and experienced what I had been. She then proceeds to tell me that she felt a weird, bad energy the moment that she stepped foot in my apartment, and that gave her confirmation on why she felt that way. Now, after that occurred, I finally realized that what I've been experiencing wasn't in my head, and I was tired of being terrified in my own apartment and needed to do something about it. Context. Before I'd moved into my second apartment, I was helped by some wonderful nuns that assisted me on getting my first apartment when I was homeless. That was after being kicked out. They took me in and showed me their way of being Catholic. They were the kindest, sweetest people pretty much ever, and were the first people to show me how genuine love and support is supposed to feel. Being that I often prayed with them, they gave me travel bottles of holy water as well as one of their rosaries. Confrontation. With my rosary in hand and holy water in the other, I put on a brave face and a strong voice as I made my way through every inch of my apartment, shouting to whatever entity was there that it was not welcome in my home and needed to leave. That I was banishing it from these walls, and whatever force held it here, it was to be uplifted and withdrawn, that it needed to prosper on elsewhere, and I doused my holy water as I spoke. Aftermath. Needless to say, I immediately felt relief after I was done, and surprisingly I had no more issues after that. The energy in my home was lighter, and I had no more encounters. I no longer live there and hope whatever was there has gotten some peace. Who knows if what I did actually worked or if I just scared the entity yelling like a crazy woman throwing water around, so it didn't bother me anymore.